The story of Meredith Lynn Sullivan Chapman, 33, captured national attention and was one of the most talked about cases of 2018. Born on January 31, 1985, in Newark, Delaware. Meredith was the youngest of 3 children in the Sullivan family. She was raised in a loving environment, supported by her older brother, Thomas, and sister, Jessica, cherished her. The Sullivan family was financially stable, and her parents ensured that their children received an excellent education while also encouraging them to pursue their personal interests and talents. However, everything changed for Meredith when she was in middle school, as her parents decided to divorce. Fortunately, the separation was friendly, with no significant arguments or legal battles, and both parents continued to be actively involved in their children's lives. Although Meredith found the divorce emotionally challenging, she always felt cared for and loved. Meredith was a kind, outgoing person who easily made friends. Her cheerful and engaging personality made her popular among her peers. From a young age, she excelled in school. Learning came easily to her. She was curious, quick to grasp new concepts, and always willing to take the lead. In addition to her academic success, she had a strong passion for painting and was also very active in sports. During high school, she focused on cheerleading, eventually became the team captain. Even as a teenager, Meredith displayed determination and confidence, working hard to achieve her goals. Despite her drive, she treated others with fairness and respect, earning the admiration of both her classmates and teachers. After graduating from high school, Meredith began her studies at the University of Delaware, focusing on corporate communications and social sciences. She quickly adjusted to college life, excelled academically, and received a merit-based scholarship. Meredith stayed active in cheerleading, even giving presentations on it. Additionally, she participated in tennis, dance, and theater productions at the university. In her junior year, she secured an internship at a radio station in Philadelphia, where she managed the station's social media. This experience aligned perfectly with her career goals and deepened her passion for communications. Meredith joined an elite student organization, taking on a significant role that helped her build connections for her future career. For her senior project, she created a documentary about Joe Biden, which received notable recognition, including a nomination for a regional Emmy Award. This success opened opportunities for her in the media and communications field. After graduating with a bachelor's degree in 2007, Meredith worked on Capitol Hill as communications manager for U.S. Congressman Mike Castle and ran a winning campaign for former Delaware State Treasurer Chip Flowers. Her ambition and strong work ethic enabled her to excel in fast-paced environments, and she consistently pursued opportunities for intellectual growth. While in college, Meredith met a slightly older young man named Luke Chapman, who was also a graduate of the University of Delaware. They quickly formed a connection and began dating. Meredith and Luke shared many similarities. Both were intelligent, ambitious, and highly motivated. Luke, like Meredith, aimed for a career in public service, eventually became a member of the New York City Council. For a period, their professional journeys aligned. They both achieved significant accomplishments in their fields. Meredith and Luke had a good income and, shortly after their wedding, bought a large home in a quiet and upscale neighborhood in Fairfield Crest. They chose to delay starting a family to concentrate on their careers in politics. They also adopted a golden retriever named Indy, whom they cared for with the same dedication that others might show to a child. After several years, Meredith changed her career significantly. She left the field of politics to pursue a career in education. She obtained a master's degree in education and returned to the University of Delaware, her former school, where she began teaching public relations and digital marketing courses. She created strategies for social media engagement and researched new communication methods. In addition to teaching, she participated in various university committees. In 2013, Meredith took on the role of marketing director while still lecturing and publishing academic work. Her colleagues and students held her in high regard, praising her intelligence, professionalism, and unwavering dedication. Luke's career was progressing well. He dedicated long hours to work and took his responsibilities seriously. Over time, he and Meredith became deeply focused on their personal ambitions, resulting in them being home together less and less often. As a result, a noticeable distance formed between them. Although they appeared to have a perfect relationship on the outside, the connection between them had faded. Conversations about starting a family had stopped, and their marriage felt more like a formality than a true partnership. However, neither of them rushed to end the relationship, as their living arrangement was functioning adequately. They cohabited more like roommates than spouses, managing their own finances and daily routines separately. There were no fights or confrontations. In public, they projected an image of happiness. No one in their social circle knew what was really happening behind closed doors. In 2016, Meredith chose to re-enter politics, this time as a candidate rather than an assistant or staff member. Driven and ambitious, she launched her campaign to challenge the current senator for Delaware's 8th District, David Sokolow. Her campaign gained momentum, and she had a good chance of winning. Ultimately, she lost by a narrow margin of less than 5%. After the election, Meredith returned to her career in education and focused on advancing her academic work. By 2017, she decided to hire an assistant, specifically a creative director, to oversee marketing efforts. She posted the job online and received numerous applications. Meredith personally interviewed each candidate, but one, a 49-year-old named Mark Gerardo, particularly impressed her. He met all the qualifications for the role in terms of experience and skills. During the interview, he made a positive impression and agreed to start working immediately. At that time, Mark was living in North Carolina but was ready to move for the position. He had been married to Jennifer Gerardo, but she stayed behind initially to sell their home and finish other obligations before relocating to join him. Mark proved to be a thoughtful, intelligent, and well-educated person with a strong background in marketing. He exceeded expectations right from the start. He quickly built a good working relationship with his new supervisor, and they found common interests almost immediately. Mark was 16 years older than his young boss. At that time, Meredith had grown emotionally distant from the husband she had been with for nearly 10 years, as both were heavily focused on their careers. Mark's situation was more complex. He had been married for almost 25 years and had remained committed to his wife during that time. As co-workers, they developed a close bond. Their teamwork was seamless, and they had a silent understanding of each other. Mark was dependable, efficient, and skilled. However, beneath their professional connection, a deeper relationship was beginning to form, unnoticed by others. For Meredith, Mark became more than just a trusted colleague. She felt comfortable sharing her personal thoughts and feelings with him, which meant a lot to her. In her busy pursuit of success, she had little time for friends, family, or meaningful conversations. Even her husband felt more like a stranger than a partner. But with Mark, she felt calm, safe, and truly understood. She eventually stopped resisting and invited him to spend time together outside of work. Just 2 weeks after Mark moved to Newark, Meredith suggested they meet after work at a local bar to relax. She wanted to have a conversation in a more casual setting. That evening, Mark opened up to her and, for the first time, shared his story. Mark Gerardo was born in 1968. His parents were strict and deeply religious, enforcing high standards of obedience and discipline in their large family. From an early age, Mark understood the importance of hard work and performed well in school. When Mark was 18, he met Jennifer, who was 16 and working as a waitress at a fast food restaurant. He often visited the restaurant, captivated by the girl behind the counter, but he never mustered the courage to talk to her or share his feelings. Jennifer and her family eventually moved to a nearby town, causing her to lose touch with Mark for several years. In 1990, they met again at a local shopping center where Jennifer worked as a sales associate. Mark was excited to see her but felt too shy to make a move. Noticing this, Jennifer took the initiative and asked him out first. Their relationship quickly grew deeper, and in 1992, Mark proposed. Jennifer happily accepted, and less than a year later, they got married. Mark and Jennifer, newly married, settled in Indianapolis, Indiana, where they purchased a home together. At this point, Mark had completed his degree in graphic design and landed a well-paying job in that field. Jen Eyre was successful as a real estate agent, so they enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle. Although they never had children, they adopted 3 dogs that they treated as part of their family. To their friends, neighbors, and relatives, Mark and Jen Eyre appeared to be a perfect couple, deeply in love and genuinely happy. They rarely had public disagreements. Their home was known for its peaceful atmosphere. Both were strong, independent individuals with stable incomes and lives. By the mid-2000s, after being together for over 20 years, the Gerardos faced difficulties. Mark experienced the loss of both his parents in a short time, while Jen Eyre, who had put a lot of effort into starting her own business, encountered significant financial troubles. Overwhelmed by emotional and financial stress, they decided to make a big change in their lives. They sold their house and moved to the peaceful town of Greenville, South Carolina. Mark quickly secured a stable job in marketing, while Jen Eyre opted to focus on family life as she looked for the right job opportunity. During this time, they traveled a lot and spent quality time together. The emotional distance that had developed between them began to disappear. Their relationship rekindled, and for a year and a half, they experienced what felt like a second honeymoon. In 2017, Mark started looking for new job opportunities to find a more fulfilling role with better pay. During his search, he found a job posting from Meredith. The couple was not afraid of the move. Mark went ahead first because the job needed him to start right away, while Jen Eyre stayed behind to sell their house and take care of local affairs. She planned to join him in Newark about a month later. That evening, Mark shared his story with Meredith, who listened carefully. In return, she talked about her own life, including her career successes and the slow deterioration of her marriage. As they talked, they connected on a deeper level, feeling as if they had known each other for years. They built a strong sense of trust and stayed at the bar until late at night. Afterward, they went back to Mark's apartment and spent the night together. This marked the beginning of a private relationship that they kept hidden from others. They continued to see each other secretly, often meeting at Mark's place while his wife was out of state. For Meredith, starting a romance with Mark didn't pose any real challenges. Her marriage to Luke had long become a mere formality. For Mark, the situation was much more complicated. First, he had never cheated in his 25 years of marriage. Second, he found himself unexpectedly attracted to Meredith, who was much younger than him. Third, he knew that Meredith was still legally married, just like he was. Despite these issues, Mark and Meredith's relationship continued even after Jen Eyre moved to Newark. From the beginning, Jen Eyre felt that something was off. She sensed that another woman had been in their new home, but she chose not to confront her husband right away. Instead, she decided to gather information to confirm her suspicions. Mark often worked late and became more distant from his family. When Jen Eyre asked him about it, he attributed his behavior to tiredness and a heavy workload. Their physical closeness had almost vanished. This continued for several months until Jen Eyre confronted him about the possibility of infidelity. Mark denied it. Although he attempted to end his affair with Meredith, their bond was too strong, and after a short break, they resumed their secret meetings. Meredith had made a decision. After discussing it with her husband, Luke, they agreed to proceed with a peaceful divorce. On February 14, 2018, Valentine's Day, Jen Eyre confronted Mark. She revealed that she was aware of his affair with his boss. She had hired a private investigator who followed Mark, took compromising photos, and recorded the locations where he met Meredith. With this evidence, Mark had no escape. However, he tried to justify his actions, assuring Jen Eyre that he would end the affair to save their marriage. Unfortunately, this promise was short-lived, as he continued his relationship with Meredith, but now with more caution. Jen Eyre didn't trust Mark, so she decided to keep a close watch on him. She placed a GPS device in his car and installed monitoring software on his phone and computer. She sewed listening devices into Mark's clothes to secretly record his conversations when they were apart. One of those recordings captured Jen Eyre's growing insecurity. The situation escalated when Mark discovered the tracking device. Realizing he could no longer put off an important decision, He told Jen Eyre that he had fallen in love with Meredith, his boss, and wanted to be with her. He also announced his plans to file for divorce. This news was a severe shock for Jen Eyre, who was 47 at the time. After nearly 25 years of marriage, her husband was leaving her for a younger woman. To make things worse, they had recently moved to a new city, and Jen Eyre had not yet found a job. This left her feeling financially unstable, emotionally unsupported, and lost. Her life felt like it was falling apart, and she was struggling to cope. By early March 2018, Meredith completed her divorce from Luke and was no longer tied to any commitments. She anticipated that Mark would also finalize his divorce soon, but his situation was more complicated. Due to specific legal requirements in their new state, Mark needed to establish residency before he could file for divorce, and they had only recently moved. At the same time, Meredith resigned from her job at the University of Delaware. She was about to start a new role as Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer at Villanova University, one of Pennsylvania's top institutions. Additionally, she received an offer for a leadership position at Ruffalo Noel Levitz, a prominent consulting firm specializing in higher education strategy. On April 5th, Meredith moved into her new home in Radnor Township, Pennsylvania. She was gradually getting settled, and about a week later, Mark joined her. He had also left his previous job and started a new role at Villanova University as Meredith's personal assistant. It felt like a fresh start for the couple, a promising new chapter. They just needed to complete a few final steps to fully embrace this new beginning, but they were unaware that a deadly threat was already approaching. Hurt and betrayed, Jen Eyre began plotting a disturbing act of revenge. On April 23, 2018, Mark and Meredith had plans to meet at a local restaurant to celebrate a fresh start. Before heading to the restaurant, Meredith stopped by her house to change clothes while Mark ordered their meal and waited for her. As time went by, Meredith didn't arrive, and she wasn't answering her phone, making Mark uneasy. Suddenly, he received a series of alarming messages from Jen Eyre, filled with anger and resentment. She wished him endless misery, and then he received a photo that shocked him. It was a picture of Meredith's kitchen. In a panic, Mark abandoned everything and rushed to Meredith's house. When he arrived, he saw her car parked in the driveway. A black Chevrolet was also parked down the street, but Mark didn't pay much attention to it at the time. The lights were on inside the house, and the front door was unlocked. However, as soon as he stepped inside, he was met with silence. He went directly to the kitchen, was horrified to find Meredith, 33, and Jen Eyre, 48, lying on the floor in large pools of blood. It was too late for them, both died from gunshot wounds. Mark screamed and rushed outside. His cries alarmed the nearby neighbors, who quickly called for emergency services. Initially, investigators thought Mark might have been involved in the incident due to his emotional struggles and complicated relationship with Jen Eyre. However, this theory was quickly dismissed. The weapon was discovered under Jen Eyre's body and contained only her fingerprints. Authorities concluded that the act was premeditated, followed by her own self-harm. Before the incident, Jen Eyre had sent several emails to a close friend expressing her intentions to do something drastic. Later evidence showed she had spent around 2 weeks preparing for this. She bought a firearm, rented a car, and collected items for a disguise. Jen Eyre also managed to find Meredith's new address on her own. For an entire week, she observed the couple's activities. Neighbors reported seeing a woman in a wig driving a black Chevrolet and lingering in the area, but she did not seem threatening. Mark also remembered noticing the car but thought it belonged to someone from the neighborhood. Jen Eyre had closely observed Meredith's routine and was aware of when they typically returned home. On the day of the incident, she arrived early, parked her car a few blocks away, and approached their house. She gained entry by breaking a window in the backyard and quietly entered. It is believed her intention was to confront, kill both Mark and Meredith before taking her own life. However, things did not go as planned. Meredith came home alone. Investigators later discovered that Meredith had taken out a life insurance policy valued at $500,000 about a year and a half prior, naming her ex-husband, Luke, as the beneficiary. After the divorce, this designation had not been changed. As a result, Luke Chapman became a person of interest as authorities looked into possible indirect involvement in the case. However, this theory was ultimately ruled out due to insufficient evidence. The investigation took only a few days, and authorities quickly closed the case, concluding that the responsible person was deceased, that there were no other suspects. Mark was exonerated but faced significant public and media scrutiny. Rather than withdrawing, he decided to speak out, giving interviews and appearing on talk shows to discuss the events in detail. A year later, Mark released a memoir detailing his relationships with both women and the circumstances surrounding the tragic incident. He expressed how deeply the experience affected him, noting that he never expected the woman he had been with for nearly 25 years could do something so devastating. While the book became a bestseller and was generally well received, public opinion was mixed. Some critics accused him of exploiting the situation and profiting from the tragedy by sharing his personal story. Meredith's family sued Luke after he refused to return the life insurance money he received after her death. The court ruled in his favor, ordering him to return only 10% of the total amount to her family, as the judge found no malicious intent on his part. Meredith had not expected to die and had not updated her policy before her passing. After she died, her remains were cremated, and her urn was given to her parents. Jennifer Gerardo was buried in her hometown of Fort Wayne, Indiana. Many still believe that Mark was also meant to be a victim that night but narrowly escaped a tragic fate. Hey detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Lauren Malt. While at university, Karen met Nigel Malt, a man with ambitious career goals. Their relationship started off well and seemed promising for starting a family. Although Karen's mother was concerned about Nigel's rude behavior, she chose to ignore this advice. They later married and had a daughter, Lauren Malt, who was born on April 8, 2002. Initially, Karen and Nigel's life together appeared happy, and they seemed to have a bright future ahead of them. However, over time, Nigel began to manipulate Karen. He used typical abuser tactics, suppressing her emotions with lies and appealing to her feelings of pity, which made her dependent on him. She was financially dependent on her husband and was unable to continue her studies due to pregnancy, making it difficult for her to find a job later on. Nigel had a long history of addiction to alcohol and prohibited substances. By this time, he was unable to function without these substances, which led to serious consequences for his life and family. Nigel had been a kind person before, but as his addiction worsened, his personality changed dramatically. He became aggressive and cruel toward Karen. Nigel's violent outbursts increased, and he began to take his anger out on Karen, eventually leading to physical abuse. Things worsened when their daughter, Lauren, observed the abuse. Despite this, Karen fought hard to save the relationship. By the time she could no longer take it, they had 4 children together. The thought of divorce was terrifying, especially with a long legal battle ahead. Their joint assets were minimal, and the prospect of being a single mother to 4 children worried Karen. She was particularly stressed about child support and custody, fearing that her husband Nigel might try to gain custody of the children just to hurt her. At this time, everyone was tired of Nigel's irresponsible behavior. He used to earn money and support his family, but now he had started to waste almost all of his income on alcohol and prohibited substances. Karen was very concerned about the impact this had on their children, who were growing up in fear. Their father drank every day and often abused their mother in front of them. This situation could not go on forever, but Karen was patient for a long time. Despite her family and friends urging her to leave him, she stayed for the sake of her children. It became clear that Nigel could not change. Karen decided to talk to Nigel about getting a divorce, which led to another angry outburst from him. He refused to pay alimony, making his stance clear to her. However, she and the children no longer wanted to live with someone so dangerous. The conversation ended in another conflict, filled with threats, which only strengthened Karen's resolve to leave her unfit husband as soon as possible. In March 2021, Karen reported Nigel's violent behavior to the police after a violent fight broke out while he was drunk. Karen later withdrew her testimony to spare him trouble, hoping that he would cooperate and consider a peaceful divorce. However, his failure to take responsibility made the situation worse. In April, Karen experienced an even more severe beating, which left her terrified for her life and concerned for her children. Realizing she needed to take action to end the abuse, she contacted the police again to report the domestic violence. Taking advantage of the moment Nigel was taken to the police station, she decided to escape with her children to her mother's house. However, he posted bail and was released while awaiting further legal action. He was placed under house arrest and tried to manipulate her emotions by claiming he would end his life. But this no longer affected Karen. She was determined to act strongly and see things through to the end. To show Nigel that she was serious, she attempted to obtain a restraining order, but unfortunately, this effort failed. During this time, financial troubles worsened, leading Nigel to drink more heavily and become increasingly aggressive, cruel. He could not control his anger, treating not only his wife poorly, but also Lauren and their sons. Finally, Nigel was found guilty of domestic violence and received a suspended sentence. He was prohibited from contacting Karen and the children. During this time, he lost everything. Karen left him and refused to listen to any excuses or promises. He also lost touch with his children, who were no longer interested in seeing him because of his unpredictable and cruel behavior. Alcohol, which he had developed a daily habit of consuming, was banned, and he was unable to control his addiction. It appeared he was using alcohol as a way to cope with the hope of reconciling with his wife. However, Karen was firm in her decision and demanded a divorce. All of this has left Nigel feeling demotivated. Despite his promises to stop using prohibited substances, his condition worsened. He claimed this was due to his need to cope with his problems. The issue of alimony needed to be addressed, as it was nearly impossible for Karen to support 4 children alone. Karen found a job as a salesperson, but her income was insufficient. To help, their daughter Lauren took on several part-time jobs. Meanwhile, Karen's lawyer reassured her that she didn't need to worry about custody. Nigel was a severe alcoholic, and due to allegations of violence, he could be completely barred from seeing the children. At this time, Lauren's relationship with her father, Nigel, was strained, so she only wanted to communicate with her mother. During this time, Karen and her children lived in her grandmother's house in a small village called West Winch in Norfolk County, UK. Lauren turned 19 during this time and was dating a guy named Arthur. On Sunday, January 23, 2022, Arthur took Lauren to work at the store where she was employed as a salesperson. Throughout the day, Nigel called his daughter, Lauren, multiple times. It was unclear what he wanted, but she suspected he was in an unstable state. To avoid distractions at work, she chose not to engage in any conversations. After a long and tiring shift, Lauren returned home, hoping to unwind with her boyfriend before starting her next shift the following day. She was working hard, including overtime, to save money for her education. That evening, Nigel began calling again. It was clear he was not sober. Lauren decided to ignore his calls, hoping he would calm down. However, he was relentless, calling 19 times between 6:25 p.m. and 6:52 p.m. Despite the constant ringing, Lauren remained silent. Unfortunately, ignoring Nigel was no longer an option. He lived just 10 minutes away, making it easy for him to show up unannounced. At around 7:01 p.m., Nigel called Lauren, and she answered out of fear that not responding would escalate things further. Their conversation was brief and quickly turned hostile, filled with insults and threats. Lauren tried to calm her father, but her efforts only seemed to infuriate him more. According to Arthur, Nigel arrived at Lauren's house at 7:21 p.m. while Karen was at work. He was clearly drunk and acted aggressively. Lauren stepped outside, attempting to de-escalate the situation, but he responded with insults and tried to provoke a fight. He swung the crowbar and nearly hit her several times. After several attempts to grab her, he threatened to attack Arthur, who had been with her. Eventually, Lauren prompted Nigel to leave, expressing her desire to avoid further communication with him in that state. Lauren attempted to get Nigel into the car to make him leave, but unexpectedly, he began screaming again. He jumped into his car, and just as Lauren was behind it, he suddenly reversed and ran over his own daughter. He paused for a few seconds, staring at her through the windshield. She was seriously injured, bleeding and screaming for help, but he did nothing. He didn't even get out of the car or call for an ambulance. Instead, he pressed the gas pedal and ran over Lauren a second time. It all happened so fast that Arthur couldn't react in time to assist her. The commotion drew the attention of neighbors, who called the police. One man rushed into the street, trying to stop Nigel, the crazed driver. Nigel saw Lauren lying on the ground, moaning in pain with serious injuries, but she was still alive. The neighbor realized that calling an ambulance was urgent, as Lauren had sustained injuries that would prevent her from being moved. However, Nigel was indifferent and insisted that everything was fine, claiming Lauren only had a few scratches. He pushed away the neighbor and Arthur, who were shouting at him to stop and call for help. Instead of calling emergency services, Nigel picked up Lauren and placed her in the passenger seat of his car. As he did this, Lauren moaned in pain, especially when Nigel tried to push her into the car. She was unable to sit up straight or maintain her balance due to her injuries, which likely included fractures. Nigel didn't even buckle her seatbelt, causing her to roll onto the floor in front of the passenger seat. While driving, he called his ex-wife, Karen, and began to tell a confusing story about an incident in which he accidentally injured Lauren. He was drunk, and his explanation was muddled. Karen didn't fully understand what was happening, but decided to wait for Nigel to arrive at her workplace. Nigel insists that Lauren is not seriously injured and wants to inform Karen so that Karen can take her to the hospital. He admitted that he couldn't do it himself because he had been drinking and was afraid of losing his driver's license. He drove directly to the parking lot in front of the store where Karen worked. Upon seeing Lauren's condition, Karen realized that Nigel had downplayed the severity of the situation. Lauren was in critical condition, and Karen struggled to lift her from the floor into a seat. During this time, Nigel merely watched in silence. Lauren showed no response. It appeared she could lose consciousness from the pain. Eventually, Karen called for an ambulance. Lauren was taken to the hospital, where doctors quickly realized her injuries were severe and could only be treated at a specialized medical center. They did everything possible to save her life. Unfortunately, a few minutes after she was on the operating table, her heart stopped beating. Meanwhile, the police arrived at the scene where Lauren was stabbed. There, they met Arthur and the neighbors, who witnessed the horrific incident. Bloody tire marks were visible on the driveway, evidence left by Nigel. Unlike many other crimes, there was enough evidence to bring immediate charges. The medical examiner evaluated the injuries of Lauren, who was the victim of a double car crash. She suffered a broken back, which caused her to lose her balance and fall onto the car floor. Her rib cage was severely damaged, multiple ribs were broken, her lungs were torn, and she experienced significant internal bleeding. The traumatic injuries to her chest and abdomen were fatal, as many of her internal organs were crushed or harmed by bone fragments. It was clear that she had been run over by a car, and she might have survived the first collision. After the second collision, she might have had a chance of survival if she had not been pushed into the car by Nigel and fallen, and if paramedics had been called immediately. Unfortunately, her fall to the floor of the car made her condition worse, and the delay ultimately claimed her life. Nigel Malt was quickly apprehended. It was discovered that he was highly intoxicated, with a blood alcohol level more than twice the legal limit for driving. Karen believed his aggressive behavior was solely due to alcohol or prohibited substance use. After his arrest, Nigel refused to cooperate with authorities. Nigel provided basic details about his name and address to the police, but refused to discuss the incident. During the preliminary hearing, he denied any wrongdoing, despite clear evidence against him. He explained that he went to see Lauren that evening after she didn't answer his calls, and then spoke to him rudely. He tried to talk to her, but she was unresponsive because he was leaving and planned to talk later. As he backed his car out, he felt a slight thump, but assumed he had hit a box or a rock that he hadn't seen in the rearview mirror. He had no clue that he had run over his own daughter. When he backed up to check what he had hit, he accidentally ran over her again. This is clearly a dishonest excuse from a coward who dares not admit his guilt. The detectives observed how unemotional he was when discussing his daughter's death, and it seemed to have no effect on him. In conversations about his family, he often spoke of Karen and Lauren with disdain. This situation was completely baffling. Nigel's wife Karen was a good woman devoted to her family. Lauren grew up to be just like her mother, a decent person. Despite the difficult home life caused by Nigel, she avoided alcohol and other harmful substances. Instead, she focused on her education, career, and improving her life. The neighbor and Lauren's boyfriend Arthur contradicted Nigel's assertion that the incident was accidental. They claimed that after Nigel ran over her while reversing, he paused for a few seconds, shining his headlights on her. Nigel could not have missed her at that moment. Then, he intentionally ran over her a second time. This could not have been an accident. Even if he didn't see her the first time, she was clearly in his line of sight the second time. The neighbor claimed that there was a conflict between Nigel and Lauren that evening. He described Nigel as aggressive and unkind. Even when Nigel hit Lauren with his car, he showed anger on his face and did not stop. The neighbor believed that the violence started because Lauren was simply asking him to leave. The police have obtained new evidence. While the neighbor attempted to talk to Nigel, several local residents recorded the incident with their cameras and phones from their windows. This footage was later presented in court. It clearly showed Nigel intentionally running over Lauren, and the prosecutor's office argued that the initial incident was also not an accident. Even the defense lawyer acknowledged that what happened could hardly be seen as a mere coincidence. The defense attorney focused on arguing that the murder was unintentional, but this argument lacked credibility. However, the bloody tire tracks and Nigel's tire tracks were a perfect match. Given the undeniable evidence, Nigel Malt was found guilty. In September 2022, a hearing was held where the sentence was announced. Nigel Malt was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 18 years before he could apply for parole. The court noted that Karen's claims of domestic violence were considered when determining the sentence. Karen's family made it clear that they would remain involved. Karen stated in a media interview that she would attend every parole hearing to ensure that Nigel did not get released. At the sentencing hearing, Nigel relied on crutches for support throughout the proceedings. He maintained his innocence, claiming the incident was an accident. Many believed he was trying to gain sympathy from the court by portraying himself as a victim, a tactic he often used with Karen. Others saw this as just punishment for a man who had killed a child. Karen had decided to proceed with the divorce, feeling ashamed to be associated with a man who killed his own daughter in a drunken rage. He had used his car as a weapon, running over her twice and leaving her no chance of survival. Given these circumstances, Karen felt the sentence was too lenient and believed Nigel should never be released. Karen argued that he was a dangerous and cruel man who had completely lost control due to excessive drinking and the use of prohibited substances. She warned that if he were released, he would continue to kill. It was only a matter of time. Notably, Nigel's sons have repeatedly stated that they would only feel safe if their father remained in prison for life. The case has created great public outrage, leading to much discussion about protecting children and spouses from domestic abusers. Activists are calling for harsher penalties for individuals like Nigel, including life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. However, no substantial changes have been made so far. At around 4 p.m. on Friday, April 15, 2011, in Lorgues, France, 27-year-old Alexander Durand was on his way home when he received a call from his younger sister, Séverine. She was a high school student, and the siblings had a close relationship, often calling each other. However, today she called not to share good news or weekend plans. Instead, she informed him that their mother, Colette, had not picked her up after school as she usually did. The day before, Séverine had been with their father, who had taken her to school in the morning. She had tried calling their mother multiple times, but her calls went unanswered. This was unusual because their mother was normally very responsible, and there was no reason for her not to come and pick up her daughter. Séverine was worried that something might have happened, such as an accident. She advised Alexander to check the situation and visit their mother's house. Alexander was also worried, so he called his mother several times, but received no response. Finally, he decided to visit his mother's house himself. When Alexander arrived, Séverine was already there, but she was still very anxious, even more than before. She was in the house with the gendarmes, and what they discovered was very concerning. Colette's car was parked in the driveway, the doors were unlocked, and the keys were in the ignition. 52-year-old Colette had vanished without a trace. The keys to the house were also in the car, so Alexander took them and went inside to see what was happening. The house was completely empty, as if she had simply disappeared. The gendarmes quickly began their search for Colette since the situation was becoming increasingly alarming. Initially, they suspected a robbery, but they found that nothing was stolen from the house. The doors and windows were untouched. In the back seat of the car, they discovered Colette's purse, which held all her identification, bank cards, and cash. She could not have left willingly without those items. Tension heightened. Even after 3 hours of searching, there was still no news. Both the house and the car were thoroughly examined, but no leads emerged. As a result, the search area was expanded to include the outskirts of the town. None of the neighbors had seen anything out of the ordinary, no suspicious noises or activity near Colette's home. To learn more about her, the police interviewed her relatives. Colette, a divorced mother of 4, was known for her reserved and calm demeanor. She was not someone who would spontaneously disappear. She had no mental health issues or addictions. At the time, Colette was working as a supermarket manager. She was polite, punctual, and a devoted mother. Everyone who knew her was confused and did not understand what had happened, as she had no troubling relationships and no history of violence. The evidence suggested that Colette's disappearance was not accidental. The police believed that whoever was involved in this incident was someone she was very familiar with. At the very least, Colette had allowed this person into her house or had given them the right to enter. After investigating, the police identified the primary suspect. She lived by herself in a small 2-story house. To save on expenses, she rented the first floor to a man named Bernard. During his interview, Bernard made some strange and unsettling remarks. He speculated on how Colette might have been abducted, suggesting that she could have been struck on the back of the head, rendering her unable to call for help. He also provided a detailed account of her medical condition, noting that she was diabetic and needed urgent assistance to avoid serious health consequences. His level of knowledge about Colette raised suspicions among the police. Furthermore, Colette's son, Alexander, revealed that Bernard was in love with his mother, which could explain his insight into her behavior and routines. This revelation increased suspicions, as Bernard could potentially have a motive. Alexander noted that, despite Bernard's interest, His mother did not reciprocate and had no intention of developing anything beyond friendship. She was solely focused on her children and her work, completely dismissing the idea of a romantic relationship with Bernard. When detectives investigated Bernard's background, they found that he had a criminal history. In 1999, he assaulted his girlfriend with a weapon after she tried to end their relationship. His ex described him as very hot-tempered and unable to control his rage. As a result of these incidents, suspicions about Bernard increased. Colette's lack of interest may have caused him to become angry, and what happened next remains unclear. In 1999, Bernard received a brief 6-year prison sentence for an attack, mainly because the girl he attacked survived. Now, he was called to the police station for questioning as the primary suspect in Colette's disappearance. The police were trying to determine when Colette went missing, and Bernard claimed to have useful information. He reported that on the afternoon of April 14, 2011, while watching television, he heard noises coming from the second floor, where Colette had lived. He could hear footsteps on the wooden floor, but then everything went quiet. He did not see Colette leave, making it likely that he was the last person to have seen her. However, the police were concerned about Bernard's behavior. He was unable to recall the exact time of the noises or even remember what show he was watching, raising further suspicions. Bernard's main problem was that he didn't have a verifiable alibi. However, there was no evidence against him, so the police had to let him go. The next morning, officers came to inspect his house. Bernard greeted them with shouts and was initially unwilling to let them enter. Eventually, he agreed to show them around the first floor of the rented property but continued to make odd comments. Notably, he pointed out a hatch that led to the basement. He remarked that if he had killed someone, he would have hidden the body there, yet he insisted he was innocent and claimed the basement was empty. Upon inspection, there was indeed no one there. Meanwhile, when law enforcement searched Colette's home, they discovered suspicious stains believed to be washed blood, but this could not be confirmed. Despite the lack of evidence, suspicion remained around Bernard. Deciding to keep a close watch on him, the detectives sought to establish the exact time of Colette's disappearance, but clues were scarce. She had been alone for several days with minimal contact with her neighbor until April 15th. Anything could have happened during that time. Investigators began to piece together her movements, partly based on Bernard's statement that he had heard loud noises from the floor above on April 14th, the day before she vanished. As the investigators looked into the case, they realized that no one had seen Colette since April 15th. They managed to locate her friend, who stated that he had last seen Colette on April 14th around 3:30 p.m. at a gathering with mutual friends. He mentioned that after leaving the party, she got into her car intending to drive to Draguignan but planned to stop at home first. This was the only information available and was considered a starting point for the investigation, as more than 40 hours had passed since she went missing. Communicating with Colette's friend helped them determine a rough timeline for when she went missing. In her car, investigators found not only her personal belongings but also her mobile phone. They began analyzing the phone to see whom Colette had communicated with in the hours leading up to her disappearance. Notably, there was a call that lasted about 40 seconds, made shortly before 3:30 p.m. The call was from Sylviane Fabre, Colette's ex-husband's sister. Sylviane was contacted, and she stated that she had met Colette during Colette's marriage to her brother. At that time, Colette's relationship with her husband was not very good, so they decided to separate. However, afterward, the former spouses and their families managed to maintain friendly relations. Sylviane mentioned that back in 2008, they collaborated with Colette to invest money in a joint business. Shortly before Colette's disappearance, the business partners had a small conflict regarding these assets, but Sylviane claimed that everything was resolved, and they continued to work together. Together, Sylviane and Colette created a real estate company that generated a substantial income, which provided Sylviane with a potential motive. Not only were they distant relatives, but they also had shared finances and property, which can often lead to such conflicts. Naturally, Sylviane denied any wrongdoing. Colette's daughter mentioned that Sylviane often had conflicts regarding their joint activities. They could argue and reconcile several times a day. However, Colette's daughter described all these disputes as minor issues that were resolved quickly. The gendarmes checked Sylvian's schedule for the last few days. She had an alibi confirmed by her son. For almost the entire duration of the investigation, suspicions against Sylvian were not substantiated, and the search operation again hit a dead end. On April 17, 2011, the prosecutor's office began a judicial investigation into the disappearance of Colette. With no leads left and all suspicious individuals cleared as unlikely suspects, there was no option but to notify the media and hope, with their assistance, to obtain new witnesses who might have noticed something. At a recent press conference, officials announced that while there were priority leads in the criminal investigation, no suspects had been identified. This news sparked significant interest among journalists, as the case could potentially involve themes of business, money, love, or betrayal. Consequently, rumors began circulating about Colette immediately, some of which were quite alarming. Her information, background, and photos quickly became prominent in newspapers and on television. Her children expressed their desire to see her again and shared how difficult her absence was for them. The most concerning aspect was that the critical 48-hour window for finding her alive had already passed, significantly diminishing the chances of a successful rescue. While the prosecutor's office hoped to gather new leads from the public through the media, the police were actively searching the nearby villages. Following the press conference, the search area was widened, and a special investigative unit took over the case. Colette's disappearance began to attract national attention. The media frenzy intensified as they attempted to connect her case with another notorious crime that had recently shaken France. A few days before Colette went missing in early April 2011, 5 members of the Dupont de Ligonnès family, including the wife and 4 children, were found murdered under the terrace of their home in Nantes. The head of the family, Xavier, disappeared shortly after the murders, having been spotted on the outskirts of the city on April 15. Authorities believe Xavier was responsible for the crime, and he was placed on a nationwide wanted list. Notably, the location of the massacre was only 30 kilometers from Colette's home. The media quickly linked these incidents together. The timing coincided with Colette's likely disappearance, raising the possibility that Xavier kidnapped her. An even stranger coincidence was that the Dupont de Ligonnès family lived in a house that Colette had sold in 1992. Xavier was viewed as a respectable citizen, a devoted husband, and a caring father who was engaged in his community and known for his honesty and fairness. However, it later emerged that Xavier was deep in debt at the time he murdered his family. Just days before the killings, he purchased cement, tools, and 4 bags of lime, suggesting he had a motive and was preparing for the crime. Journalists speculated that Xavier may have had a grudge against Colette, but the reason for his potential revenge remained unclear. Rumors spread quickly, with theories ranging from a fraudulent real estate deal to unrequited love. Others suspected it could be part of a planned escape. Xavier could have taken Colette so they could be together again. Witnesses came forward, claiming they had seen Xavier's car near her home. Some even reported seeing him stop in town on April 14. Although these accounts seemed unlikely, detectives noticed clear connections between Xavier and Colette. This led them to investigate the possibility that the two had escaped together. Consequently, Colette shifted from being seen as a victim to potentially being viewed as an accomplice in crimes that might have involved Xavier's family. However, friends and family of Colette quickly disputed this theory, asserting that she was not capable of cruelty. As detectives explored new leads that emerged almost daily, they became convinced that there was no romantic or conspiratorial link between Xavier and Colette. They began to feel that the similarities between Xavier and Colette were merely coincidental or tragic coincidences. To definitively eliminate this theory, they decided to examine both Xavier's and Colette's mobile phones. They encountered a challenge. Xavier's phone could not be tracked, and there were no calls or messages from Colette's phone to his. After their investigation, they found no evidence of any contact between the two after the sale of the house. Although the theory regarding Xavier was intriguing, it ultimately consumed valuable police time and resources. 3 weeks after Colette's disappearance, any possible link to Xavier was dismissed. Xavier himself was never found, leaving the French police at an impasse. The case has reached a dead end and will not make any progress until at least May 15, 2011. On this day, about 30 kilometers from Lorgues, two tourists were returning from a forest hike and taking photos. While using a remote path to capture some scenic shots, they were hit by a strong, unpleasant smell coming from the side of the path. One of the tourists decided to investigate the source of the odor. As the woman approached a pile of stones, the smell intensified and became unbearable. When she moved one of the stones, she discovered a leg protruding from beneath the rocks. The tourists quickly called the police. Within minutes, gendarmes arrived at the location and found the body of a woman in an advanced state of decomposition, making it difficult to determine her gender. Only her clothing provided a clue. The police attempted to identify the victim but were initially unsuccessful. They took photographs of her clothes, accessories, and jewelry, which were then shown to the families of various women who had gone missing in the area. Among those families were the children of Colette. Her daughter and son recognized their mother based on what she was wearing. Although the gendarmes believed they had identified Colette a month after her disappearance, they chose to wait for more conclusive evidence. DNA analysis was necessary to confirm family ties, as appearance alone could not provide definitive proof. Ultimately, the examination verified the police's suspicions. The body was indeed identified as Colette Durand. On May 17, 2011, an autopsy was conducted on the body that had been found at the Forensic Medical Institute. Unfortunately, the condition of the remains was so poor that the exact cause of death could not be determined. The forensic expert did confirm that Colette had not been abused before her death, but it did not help the police make much progress in the case. As a result, the investigation into her disappearance shifted focus to a murder investigation. On June 9, 2011, Colette's body was buried. Law enforcement officers attended the funeral, knowing that criminals sometimes show up at such events to witness the impact of their actions. Some may seek to relive their emotions, while others might derive satisfaction from seeing the grief of the victim's family. Several officers remained in vehicles, while others blended in with the attendees, discreetly observing the proceedings. During this time, the police noted that Sylvian, Colette's business partner and sister-in-law, was missing from the funeral. Although Sylvian and Colette were close, Sylvian's absence raised suspicions. This concern increased a few days later when Sylvian attempted to end her life. Although she survived with minor injuries and poisoning, her actions were alarming. When the police arrived after a call from Sylvian's neighbor, they found Sylvian lying on her couch at home. She was unable to fully express herself, so she was taken to a medical center for assistance. However, the officers did not leave empty-handed. They discovered a lengthy letter addressed to her son, David Perel, which was several pages long. While the letter did not contain explicit confessions regarding her actions concerning Colette, the detectives interpreted it as a potential admission of guilt prior to her death. The police decided to speak with David, and he provided new insights into the troubled relationship between Sylvian and Colette. He believed that shortly before Colette's death, she and Sylvian had experienced a serious conflict related to their shared business. Intrigued, the detectives asked David to recount his activities on April 14th. He described the daytime as uneventful, but his account of the evening was much more compelling. On April 14th, at around 10 p.m., Sylvian asked David to drive her to Colette's house to discuss some important business matters. Her own car was broken, so she turned to him for help. However, on their way, his car also broke down a few kilometers from home. Despite the rain, they decided to walk back instead. He took the car battery with them, and together they returned in an attempt to fix the car. On the night Colette disappeared, this mother and son spent hours in the rain attempting to repair a car left outside the city. The gendarmes suspected that David was trying to create a questionable alibi to explain his absence from home. This suspicion was further fueled by Sylvian's initial statement to the detectives, in which she claimed she had spent the previous days at home. It seemed implausible that she could forget such a significant event. When Sylvian regained consciousness in the medical center, her account of the events changed. Her new story mirrored what her son had previously told, including all the important details. The gendarmes decided to investigate her claims. They found that on the night of April 14th to 15th, there was no rain in the area. Additionally, it was odd that Sylvian and her son were unable to flag down a passing car for a ride home. Why did they walk so far while carrying a battery with them? The road's vehicle monitoring system revealed that approximately 5 cars passed by during the time they were walking home. It seemed unlikely that none of these drivers would have stopped to assist them in the rain. This raised suspicions that David and Sylvian were hiding something and might be involved in the death of Colette. Unfortunately, there was no physical evidence to support these suspicions. As a result, the decision was made to keep a close watch on them over the next few months. Their phone calls were monitored, and on February 8, 2012, this surveillance yielded important information. The police intercepted a conversation between Sylvian and Bernard, who was Colette's neighbor. It became clear that Bernard knew much more than he had initially revealed. On April 14th, he not only heard sounds coming from above but also saw Sylvian's car arrive at the house, indicating he was aware of her actions. David, Sylvian's son, was also involved, as he was driving for his mother. On February 20th, 2012, David and Sylvian were arrested. Detectives viewed David as the weak link. During questioning, he quickly confessed, seeming relieved to unburden himself of his guilt. He revealed that on April 14th, they arrived at Colette's home around 3:30 p.m. Afterward, Sylvian lured her into a barn behind the house. A business dispute led to further conflict, during which Sylvian attacked Colette, beating her to the ground. Then, she took a rope from the barn and began to strangle Colette in front of David. Although he did not intervene or participate in the attack, he admitted to helping move the body afterward. They left Colette's body on the property, covering it with a tarpaulin. In the evening, when they fabricated the story about the broken car, they took the body out of town. David assisted Sylvian in dragging the deceased away from the road and covering her with stones. Despite David's confession, Sylvian denied any wrongdoing. She claimed the death was accidental and that they hid the body out of fear of the police. However, it was puzzling how well prepared she seemed for the crime, as she had latex gloves that prevented her from leaving fingerprints. After being detained for 48 hours, Sylvian was charged with murder, while David was released. Though he was viewed as an accomplice, his testimony needed verification, so he remained under judicial supervision. The next step was to determine the motive. It turned out that the motive was linked to financial issues. Sylvian's business was on the brink of failure when Colette uncovered that Sylvian was embezzling money from clients. Another possible motive was jealousy, as Colette was thriving while Sylvian's problems continued to grow. Shortly before the tragedy, Sylvian had gone through a painful divorce, and one of her 2 sons had been convicted of violence. Communication between her and David had nearly ceased, and his involvement in the crime marked the end of their close relationship. On January 21, 2014, David was charged in court with the murder of Colette. He claimed that he was only an accomplice and that he helped hide the body due to pressure from his mother. Sylvian, his mother, argued that the incident was an act of involuntary manslaughter. She explained that she had lost her temper after a conflict with her business partner, Colette, who was trying to take everything from her. Facing life in prison, Sylvian sought to downplay her guilt. The prosecutor's office looked into the role of the tenant, Bernard. Although he witnessed the conflict between Sylvian and Colette, he did not report it because he feared Sylvian. Ultimately, he testified as a witness for the prosecution. On January 23, 2014, the jury found Sylvian Fabre guilty of manslaughter, sentencing her to 30 years in prison. Bernard was acquitted, and David Perel received a 3-year suspended sentence. Over the years, Colette's children struggled to understand what had happened in that barn with their mother. Despite the complicated trial, they felt uncertain that the entire truth had been uncovered. They were unhappy with the court's verdict, believing that Sylvian had committed premeditated murder but had received a lenient sentence. Additionally, they felt Bernard was more involved than he had admitted and had evaded responsibility for the crime. The case of Colette Durand is a tragic and mysterious story that leaves many unanswered questions for her family and the community. Colette, a devoted mother, suddenly disappeared, leading to a lengthy investigation filled with suspicions of love, money, and betrayal. Ultimately, the truth was revealed through David's confession and Sylvian's sentencing, but was justice truly served? Bernard, the neighbor with a murky past, remains a significant question mark as he evades all charges. For Colette's children, the pain lies not only in losing their mother but also in the feeling that the secrets surrounding their mother's death may be buried forever. At 3 a.m., police knocked on the door of a quiet apartment in Houston. Inside, Leon Jacob and Valerie McDaniel thought their troubles were resolved. However, when Valerie opened the door, instead of finding relief, she was met with handcuffs. 2 people were missing, and it was believed they were dead. Now, they at the center of this situation had to confront the reality of what had happened. Unbeknownst to them, everything had been a setup. This story revolves around deception, manipulation, and a plan that spiraled out of control, ultimately leading to a dramatic downfall. Leon Jacob had always dreamed of becoming a doctor and saving lives, but the reality was much darker. His medical career was marked by unfinished residencies, disciplinary actions, and a series of failures. His personal life was equally troubled. Leon married Annie Morrison in 2001. She was ambitious, smart, but their home life was chaotic. They moved to New York to advance their careers, Annie in law and Leon in medicine, but what should have been a time for growth turned into a nightmare. Verbal abuse quickly escalated to physical violence. Leon hid his actions well, bruises were concealed and threats were spoken softly. By the time their second son was born, Annie lived in a constant state of fear. Leon's anger was uncontrollable. He drank heavily, gambled irresponsibly, and manipulated Annie through psychological abuse and terrifying threats. During one violent confrontation, he even pulled a knife on her in front of their child. On another occasion, Leon locked Annie and their baby in a room, telling her that the only way out was in a plastic bag. Annie finally spoke up. With her parents' assistance, she escaped with her children to Chicago. However, Leon did not give up. He stalked Annie and her family, expressing anger towards the court that gave her custody. Unable to control her, he shifted his attention to someone new, Megan Varikas. Megan worked at a hotel in Pittsburgh, where Leon had moved for his 6th residency. Like his previous positions, this one ended poorly due to his aggressive behavior towards staff and neglect of patient safety. Despite this, Megan was initially taken in by his charm. They relocated to Houston in late 2014, hoping for a new beginning, but Leon remained unchanged. By 2017, their relationship had deteriorated into threats, harassment, and fear. Megan faced physical abuse, constant stalking. When she attempted to leave, he followed her. When she sought refuge, he tracked her down. Even when she found safety at work, he would lurk outside, hiding in the bushes and confronting her coworkers. He bombarded her with emails filled with a mix of desperate requests and angry outbursts. He was unwilling to let her go and refused to accept her rejection. Megan applied for a restraining order and also sued Leon for harassment and assault. Facing criminal charges, Leon panicked as his dream of becoming a doctor slipped further away. Instead of accepting responsibility for his actions, Leon started to plan something more sinister. He reached out to a family connection and visited a law firm run by friends of his parents, where he met Laura, the owner's niece. Laura attempted to mediate the situation, hoping to persuade Megan to drop the charges and reconcile, but Megan refused. This rejection triggered Leon's dark thoughts. He considered that Laura helped Megan disappear. When Laura sensed his disturbing intention, she quickly distanced herself from him. Leon, feeling rejected, began sending Laura numerous messages and harassing her at her workplace. Although Laura felt unsafe, she did not report him to the police. Instead, she contacted her friend, seeking his help to intervene. Leon continued to stand his ground. A month went by without any progress. When Laura tried to reach her friend again, a stranger named Zach picked up the phone. He informed her that her friend had passed away unexpectedly. Zach, a former soldier, mentioned that he was familiar with the situation and offered his assistance. This new relationship would soon make a significant impact. Leon's personal life took an unexpected turn when he started dating Valerie McDaniel, a well-regarded veterinarian from Houston and a neighbor of his mother. Valerie, known for her compassion and passion for animals, had a successful career running the Montrose Veterinary Clinic since 2000. However, her personal life had been marked by deceit. She had previously been happily married to Mac, whom she met in college. In 2008, they adopted a baby girl after facing infertility challenges. Unfortunately, their family life fell apart when a woman unexpectedly contacted Valerie, claiming to be Mac's mistress and revealing years of his infidelity. Despite Mac's pleas for forgiveness, the cheating continued. Valerie eventually filed for divorce in 2014. After a lengthy and expensive legal battle, they finalized the divorce in 2016, which included her buying out Mac's share of the clinic for over $1 million. After becoming single and raising her daughter, Valerie decided to move to an upscale neighborhood in Houston. There, she met Leon, a charming, attractive man who was 8 years younger and worked as a doctor. At 48 years old and seeking stability, Valerie found herself attracted to him, even though she noticed some troubling signs. Not everyone supported their relationship. Friends cautioned her about Leon's arrogance. Her ex-husband Mac grew increasingly worried when he learned that Leon had been arrested for assault, especially since their daughter was now spending time at Valerie's house. This concern led to tension between Valerie and Mac. Valerie had assured Mac that Leon would not be present during their daughter's visits, but she broke that promise. Leon continued to come in Valerie's home, ignoring the warnings and boundaries set by others. As Leon's time to face her lawsuit approaches, he received a call from Zach. Leon saw this as an opportunity. Zach, who described himself as a former soldier, appeared to be the ideal person to help with what Leon considered a solution. Leon wanted Megan out of the way before the trial. If she is unwilling to leave the state on her own, it would be best for her to go back to Pittsburgh. Without hesitation, Leon offered Zach money and gave him a $2,500 down payment during a meeting in early February. However, Zach, whose real name was Motaz Azza, had no intention of harming anyone. Instead, he viewed this as a chance to prevent a potential tragedy and decided to trick Leon. He told Leon that the job was completed, claimed that Megan had been taken and convinced not to testify. Leon wanted to talk to her, but Zach advised against it, insisting she was emotionally unstable. For now, Leon accepted this and waited until Megan arrived at court. When she did, Leon lost his temper, while Zach pretended not to know what was going on. To keep up the act, Zach created a new plan. This one involved pretending to cause a car accident and planting banned substance to damage Megan's reputation before the trial. Leon agreed once more and continued to pay Zach, but the plan didn't succeed. Zach claimed that his team, whom he had supposedly hired, had been arrested. In reality, there was no team and no plan. It was all a deception. By the time Zach vanished, Leon had given him a total of $9,000. During a later court hearing, Zach admitted that he never called the police because he feared they wouldn't believe him. Given his previous theft conviction and a suspended sentence, he worried that his testimony would not be taken seriously, especially against someone like Leon Jacob, who was still a respected doctor. Feeling frustrated and betrayed, Leon looked for help elsewhere. He reached out to a prominent Houston city councilman and bail bondsman, Michael Kubosh, who had previously helped post bail for Zach. However, when Leon rushed into Michael's office demanding Zach's phone number, the discussion quickly changed direction. Leon was forceful and persistent. He accused Zach of disappearing with a large sum of money. Confused, Michael asked for more details. That's when Leon disclosed a shocking fact. He wanted Megan removed from Houston and taken off the witness list for good. Michael felt a surge of panic. He quickly reached out to the police. Authorities acted swiftly and tracked down Zach, discovering that his real name was Motaz. After his arrest, Motaz told detectives that he had been deceiving Leon to prevent a real crime from occurring. He claimed his actions were part of a scheme to protect Megan while also earning money. However, a crucial question remained: if he genuinely wanted to protect Megan, why didn't he contact the police earlier? After months of manipulation, deceit, and escalating threats, Motaz, previously known as Zach, decided to involve law enforcement. He agreed to cooperate with detectives in a high-stakes undercover operation aimed at capturing Leon Jacob in the act. The goal was to obtain recorded evidence of Leon ordering a hit. Detective Javier was selected to impersonate the hitman. During a wiretapped conversation, Zach informed Leon that he wasn't the suitable candidate for the job, but he had someone else in mind. Leon acted quickly. He was not only focused on Megan but also had another target in mind. He asked if Javier could take care of two assignments, the second being Valerie McDaniel's ex-husband, Mac. Both Leon and Valerie consented. Mac needed to be eliminated. On March 8, 2017, for individuals, Leon, Valerie, Zach, and undercover officer Javier gathered at an Olive Garden restaurant. This meeting was intended to be a planning session, but it was actually being recorded. Leon expressed his thoughts regarding their situation. He indicated that he did not want to kill Megan but just wanted her to leave Houston and made her too scared to testify. However, he mentioned that if she refused to leave, he was open to taking extreme actions. He even suggested using an injection to make it look like she had a heart attack. Valerie, who was sitting next to him, didn't react negatively. Instead, she shared Mac's location and proposed a plan to hijack his car while he was inside, making it look like a robbery that went wrong. She was concerned that Mac would seek full custody of their daughter. Unbeknownst to the perpetrators, their intended targets were already informed about the operation. 2 weeks prior to the meeting, police warned Megan that her life was at risk. She initially sought refuge at her parents' house but later chose to return and assist with the investigation. Mac received the same warning and request for help. Together, they became part of their own crime scene. The police staged photos to create a convincing illusion. Megan was shown bound and gagged, her eyes wide with fear, while Mac was depicted with a fake gunshot wound, slumped on the ground and in his car. These images would serve as a crucial trap for Leon and Valerie. On March 9th, Detective Javier showed Leon and Valerie photos of Mac's lifeless body. Leon examined the images closely, while Valerie nodded in agreement. They both looked satisfied with what they saw. Later that day, Javier presented a second set of images showing Megan, who appeared to be kidnapped and frightened. She would later share that, at that moment, while she was tied up and surrounded by officers posing for fake crime scene photos, she couldn't hold back her tears. The distinction between fiction and reality had blurred significantly. Javier informed Leon that Megan needed to be killed. Leon didn't dispute this. Then, early in the morning on March 10th at 3 a.m., police officers knocked on Valerie's door with the unfortunate news Megan and Mac were dead. This was a test. Leon and Valerie had failed miserably. They pretended to be shocked. Leon quickly asserted that they had stayed home all night, offering an unsolicited alibi. The detectives, fully aware of the elaborate setup, observed their reaction. It was done. They had the recordings, the photos, the lies, and now they had the evidence. Leon Jacob, who was eager to restore his reputation, created a plan that ultimately led to his downfall. Valerie McDaniel, a highly regarded veterinarian, collaborated with him on a scheme that shocked even experienced investigators. Just hours after thinking their plan had worked, Leon Jacob and Valerie McDaniel were arrested. The police revealed the shocking truth: no one had died. Mac and Megan were safe, the photos were fake, and the assassination never took place. Leon went from disbelief to panic in an instant. Valerie, shocked and speechless, found herself confronted by Mac, who was waiting just outside her apartment during the arrest. She had to look into the eyes of the man she had desperately tried to forget. Meanwhile, their daughter was sleeping inside. That same night, the little girl was taken into Mac's care. It would be the last time Valerie would see her child. Leon and Valerie were both taken to jail. Because of his previous charges, Leon was not granted bail. Valerie was released to await her trial under supervision, but she would never actually appear in court. On March 27, 2017, just weeks after her arrest, Valerie McDaniel jumped from the 7th floor of her apartment building. She left behind a legacy filled with grief and confusion, as well as a voice memo on her iPad. In the memo, she expressed her apologies and emphasized that she never intended to hurt anyone. Despite the circumstances, her patients and friends remembered her fondly as a respected veterinarian but caring mother, a woman who ultimately lost her way and all that she had worked for. Leon was not permitted to attend her funeral. His trial began nearly a year later, in March 2018. In court, Leon's defense team attempted to place all the blame on Valerie. They portrayed him as a man struggling with untreated bipolar disorder, overwhelmed by trauma and desperation. His lawyers argued that he had long faced extreme mood swings, impulsivity, and disorganized thinking, which are symptoms of a serious mental illness. They reminded the jury of the sudden death of his father from a heart attack when Leon was just 13 years old. Leon had been alone with him at that moment and carried the guilt ever since. Leon's mother, who is a lawyer, testified that he never fully processed that trauma and remained emotionally fragile as a result. The defense argued that he wasn't evil, but rather broken. The prosecution had a different perspective. They portrayed Leon as cold, calculating. He didn't just plan a crime, he also recruited accomplices, easily told lies, paid people he believed were hitmen, even proposed using chemicals to induce heart attacks. When shown images of Megan being tied up and gagged, he didn't react or object. In fact, he seemed to approve. Megan testified about the distressing experience of being stalked and harassed by Leon, which left her feeling terrified. She called the police numerous times for help. She also provided testimony, describing the threats and emotional abuse she endured during their marriage, including a chilling remark from Leon that she would not be found if she left him. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Leon maintained his innocence, claiming he never intended to harm anyone and that the police had coerced him into making him sound guilty. His defense team argued that he only aimed to intimidate Megan and protect his future. However, the jury was not convinced and took just 2 hours to reach their decision. Leon Jacob was found guilty on 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder for his attempts to have Megan and Mac killed. He received a life sentence in prison and was fined $10,000, with the possibility of parole in 2047. As the verdict was revealed, a disturbing detail surfaced. Leon once mentioned to someone that this whole situation would make for an excellent movie. However, this was not a film. The consequences were real and painful. A child lost her mother, a community lost its trust, and 2 lives were nearly destroyed, all to protect a man who believed he could act without consequences. Thankfully, this time the worst outcome was averted just in time. Kitzbühel is a small Austrian town located, with a population of just over 8,000 people. Despite its size, more than 20,000 tourists visit every winter, drawn by the local mountain slopes. For many decades, this place has been known as a winter resort for the wealthy. Additionally, there are numerous celebrations that attract athletes and fans from around the world. Since October 2018, the ski slopes have been prepared before the winter season. The hotels and tourism companies have been making the final preparations to welcome numerous guests. However, the joyful events were overshadowed by the horrific murders. Nadine Hinterholzer was born in Austria, grew up in a close-knit family. From an early age, she was energetic, cheerful, and quite pretty. She had a large circle of friends who loved her for her straightforwardness, good sense of humor, and pleasant demeanor. Nadine lived with her parents and older brother in a spacious house in Kitzbühel. At the age of 14, significant changes began in her life when she met a guy named Andreas E., who was 20 at the time. He already looked like an adult, while she was still a teenager. A 6-year age difference at that age can seem significant. Despite this, they felt a mutual attraction. After several dates, they began a romantic relationship in secret from Nadine's relatives. Eventually, they both realized that age could pose the greatest obstacle in their relationship. Nadine was concerned that her older boyfriend could face legal issues because of his involvement with a minor, but they were reluctant to break up. At first, Nadine carefully hinted to her parents about the significant changes in her life, which raised some alarms for her mother and father. However, Andreas was determined and decided to take a bold step. He personally approached Nadine's family to seek permission for their relationship. From the beginning, he emphasized that this was not a fleeting affair. He wanted to build a future with her but did not want to rush her, allowing her to finish school and pursue her education. Andreas was familiar with her brother, Kevin. Soon after meeting, they became close friends. During home visits, Andreas's initiative was highly appreciated by Nadine's parents, especially after she described him as well-mannered, polite, and loving. Overall, the family liked Andreas, so they permitted Nadine to continue their relationship. Nadine had just entered the challenging teenage years. Her parents believed that a relationship with an older boyfriend could positively influence her, as he could take care of her and protect her from unpleasant situations. Andreas acted as though Nadine meant a lot to him, growing closer to her family. Initially, they spent all their free time together, and after 3 years, Andreas moved in with them. Nadine and Andreas posted statuses on social media indicating their engagement. While Andreas had intentions of getting married, he respected Nadine's desires to finish school and make her own life decisions before rushing into marriage. They continued dating for several years, to the point where Nadine's family began to treat Andreas like their own son. Finally, Nadine turned 18, officially becoming an adult, while Andreas was already 24. They decided it was time to move out and live independently. Nadine's grandmother significantly assisted them by offering her apartment for Nadine and Andreas to settle in. By this time, Nadine had completed her schooling. She intended to continue her studies at college. She did not plan on marriage or children, which disappointed Andreas slightly, as she wanted to establish herself first. Nadine enrolled in driving school and attended classes with her friends, who often picked her up. She aspired to become a professional dancer and build a career in this field. To their relatives, Nadine and Andreas represented the epitome of romance. Although the age difference made their relationship seem unconventional, it was evident that their bond was built on love and mutual understanding. It seemed as though their lives were just beginning, with no threats on the horizon. Andreas had faced Nadine's transitional phase early in their relationship when she was just 14, and they had managed to cope with that difficult period, maintaining, even strengthening their bond. However, after she reached adulthood, some other challenges began to emerge in their relationship. Andreas was seriously determined to pursue further development, family life, and children, but he could not achieve the same aspirations from his beloved. A 24-year-old man, he worked as a bricklayer and spent the lion's share of his time, energy on his job. Upon returning home in the evening, he just wanted to relax with his girlfriend in their apartment, but this did not meet the new needs of an 18-year-old. While she had already become an adult, she still wanted to relax, spend time with friends, and go to parties. Previously, they had constantly gone out together, but now Andreas wanted to spend time at home in front of the TV, which was too boring for Nadine. Initially, she managed to persuade him to go for walks or spend time outside their home, but over time, this became nearly impossible. Andreas began to refuse such outings, citing fatigue and stating that he had to work in the morning. He complained that he wanted to relax and recharge but felt unsupported by her. During this period, the age difference between them became particularly apparent. Nadine was at the peak of her activity and craved entertainment, while she realized that Andreas had already moved past that phase of life, who now had other interests. However, she was not willing to adjust to him or give in. She wanted to live the life of a young woman, socialize, and have fun with her friends. All of this led to conflicts beginning to arise between them. Nadine even told Andreas that if this continued, she would have to break up with him. Despite her repeatedly expressing this not only to him but also to her friends and relatives, he did not take her words seriously. He saw no reason for a breakup, insisting that he still loved her, hoped she would calm down over time and everything would return to normal. He continued planning a lavish wedding, believing it was the right time since their relationship had lasted for 5 years. He wanted to change his social media status from engaged to married, but her insistence on remaining single, along with her constant reproaches and talk of breaking up, loomed over their relationship. Andreas increasingly became intrusive and rude. Nadine felt that he simply wanted to control her completely and grew angry that he could not succeed. She even began to tell her friends that they had always had problems that she had kept silent about. In the summer of 2018, Nadine made the firm decision to break up, but she did not want any conflict. She hoped they could maintain a friendly relationship. At that time, she was 19 years old, and Andreas was already 25. According to Nadine, her boyfriend was never cruel or aggressive and did not limit her communication with others. The major issue was his passivity and jealousy. He could not stand it when she was in the company of other guys. She even lost all her male friends after meeting Andreas at the age of 14. Nadine told her friend that they had decided to separate and live apart. She was sure that her boyfriend took it calmly. She believed their relationship was officially over after 5 years together. Nadine and Andreas stopped dating. He moved out of her grandmother's apartment and returned to his parents' house. The idea of maintaining friendly relations seemed to work as they both had mutual friends and kept in touch with their families. Andreas continued to be friends with Nadine's older brother, Kevin, as if nothing had happened. They were peers and had a lot in common. However, this was the calm before the storm. During this period, doubts began to surface during their communication. Nadine increasingly suspected that Andreas was not taking the breakup calmly. Kevin thought Andreas had accepted this as another whim of his girlfriend and was simply waiting for a signal from Nadine regarding the restoration of their relationship. The friends had discussed this many times. Andreas could not accept that it was truly over. Thoughts and conversations about his ex consumed almost all of his time. Andreas's behavior approached obsession. He seized every opportunity to communicate with Nadine, asking for a second chance, trying to win her back, even continuing to talk about marriage and children. Within the first month of the breakup, it became clear that Andreas did not understand the situation and was simply in denial. He did not realize that they were no longer a couple. Each time Nadine firmly said no, insisting that everything was over between them, she labeled their relationship as her youthful mistake, even confiding this to her other friends. All of this hurt Andreas, but he continued to endure. He still hoped for a reconciliation. Some of his friends sympathized with him, but by the end of the second month after the breakup, they too began to notice that his behavior resembled stalking. He showed up everywhere Nadine went, always initiating conversation. Andreas's persistence caused Nadine to start avoiding him. She tried to gently indicate that their relationship was over, but he only became more determined. When she tried to stop their meetings, he made efforts to interact with her. Nadine's friends and family knew that she was consistently rejecting his advances, but he was spreading different stories to his own circle. Even 2 months after the breakup, he still believed that she wanted to be with him and thought she was only trying to make him pursue her. Kevin tried to tell Andreas to move on and date other girls, but he remained stubborn. As of October 5, 2018, the situation remained unchanged. Nadine and Andreas had officially been separated for 3 months. Nadine's entire family was aware of the breakup. Even his parents tried to convince him to reconsider. That evening, Andreas spent time with Kevin. They visited several bars but didn't stay long in any of them. Eventually, they ended up at one bar, where Kevin unexpectedly saw Nadine. He found it surprising to run into her, especially since, despite the town being small, there were enough bars catering to tourists that it was unlikely they would see each other regularly. Andreas appeared to either be following Nadine, receiving updates on her location, or simply searching for her as he moved between various places throughout the evening. Kevin knew that for the past 3 months, Andreas had been claiming that he and Nadine loved each other and intended to get married once he won her back. While similar situations had occurred before, this time things were different. Nadine was not just with her friend, she was also accompanied by another man. When Andreas noticed this, he instantly became angry, approached Nadine, taking her hand and starting an argument. He attempted to pull her out of the bar, but she resisted. Her 24-year-old friend, Florian Jani, intervened, positioning himself between Andreas and Nadine. He insisted that he was merely a friend and not romantically involved with her, claiming they had only just met. Nonetheless, Andreas was not calmed by this explanation. He was furious that Nadine was spending time with another man and struggled to contain his anger, nearly provoking a fight in the bar. Nadine, Florian, and her brother worked hard to soothe him, prevented Andreas from asserting control over Nadine. After significant effort, they managed to calm him down, though he was still in tears. Feeling overwhelmed, Andreas chose to leave the bar, not wanting to remain in that environment. Kevin stayed behind with Nadine and Florian, worried about their safety. Andreas' outburst was alarming, and now Nadine felt genuinely concerned for her well-being. She didn't want to remain in the bar either, but feared that her ex might be waiting outside. After waiting to ensure Andreas had left, the entire group decided to walk Nadine home. Florian drove her back, even offered to stay the night to help her feel safe. Overwhelmed by fear, Nadine accepted his offer. This choice would prove to have significant consequences. Around 4 a.m., Andreas could no longer contain his jealousy and chose to contact his ex again. When he reached her house, he noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway, which he recognized as Florian's. It became clear that Andreas hadn't gone home after leaving the bar. Instead, he had remained in the parking lot, secretly watching the group. He observed that Florian was with Nadine, while no one else had left the house. This only fueled his anger. Andreas suspected that Nadine was lying and dating someone new. He felt they were enjoying themselves together without a care. He resolved to confront both Nadine and Florian about the situation. Furious, Andreas jumped out of his car and started ringing the doorbell while banging on the front door. Instead of Nadine and her friend, her father, 59-year-old Rupert, answered. He came out to calm Andreas, who was shouting. Rupert insisted it was too late for arguments and asked Andreas to leave until morning, when they could discuss everything calmly. Rupert was aware of the situation involving Florian at the bar, reassured Andreas that Nadine and Florian were just friends. Understanding and approachable, Rupert shared a cigarette with Andreas, invited him to talk outside on the street. They had a conversation on various topics, as Rupert probably hoped this would soothe Andreas and persuade him to leave. Having known each other for several years, Andreas had become a valued member of Nadine's family. Nadine's parents treated him well, which is why Rupert chose not to call the police to remove his daughter's ex-boyfriend. After speaking with Rupert, Andreas seemed to feel less agitated. He got into his car and drove off, while Rupert returned inside to go to bed. However, just a short distance down the road, Andreas began to feel annoyed again. He came back 15 minutes later, knocking on the door and ringing the bell, which disturbed everyone in the house. Nadine and Kevin came out to confront him. Unlike Rupert, they were very upset, wanted to make it clear that Andreas needed to leave. A new argument broke out at the front door. No one was holding back their words. Nadine was determined to completely cut off ties with her bothersome ex and insisted that there should be no further relationship between them. She demanded that he vanish from her life for good. Kevin backed his sister, stating that their friendship was overdue to Andreas's stalking behavior. He was worried about Andreas's unhealthy actions and wanted nothing more to do with him. Meanwhile, Andreas felt betrayed, convinced that Nadine had been unfaithful and that Kevin was protecting her. He now felt abandoned by Kevin, who he believed should have supported him instead. Before leaving, Andreas tried to find out if Nadine had cheated. However, she firmly told him it was not his concern since they hadn't been dating for several months. At that moment, Andreas had a shocking realization. Nadine had actually broken up with him 3 months ago, and all his attempts to win her back were in vain. No one expected him to pursue her anymore. Feeling angry, Andreas decided to go home, choosing to avoid confronting his feelings of hurt. At 5:30 a.m. on October 6, 2018, Andreas returned to his ex's house. He began knocking on the door and ringing the doorbell, but he did not shout. This time, Rupert responded. He was already very irritated because Andreas had kept the whole family awake the previous night. When Rupert opened the door, he intended to angrily chase Andreas away and threatened to call the police, but he was cut off before he could finish. Andreas pulled out a gun, shot him in the head twice, killing him instantly. He then stepped over Rupert's body and entered the house. Nadine's mother, 51-year-old Andrea rushed outside when she heard the noise. Tragically, she became the next victim. Andreas then attacked Kevin. He went upstairs and attempted to enter Nadine's room, but Nadine and Florian had locked the door. Andreas determined that the quickest way to reach her was through the balcony. He went outside, climbed the bars on the building's facade, broke the window, opened fire on both Nadine and her friend Florian. This horrific event unfolded within just a few minutes, resulting in the deaths of 5 people. After committing the crime, Andreas drove to the Kitzbühel police station. He arrived around 6 a.m. and placed a gun in front of a police officer at the entrance. He confessed to having just shot 5 people. Additionally, he handed over a knife and a baseball bat, which he had used to break into the Hinterholzer home. He used the bat to shatter a window and gain access to Nadine's room. While the knife was never used, it appears he brought it along for safety. The police discovered 5 bodies at the scene, and the details of their deaths confirmed Andreas's account. Each victim had been attacked at close range with multiple bullets. Florian suffered gunshot wounds to his hands as he tried to defend himself. There was nothing missing from the house. The toxicology report indicated that Andreas was sober, with no alcohol or banned substance in his system. He had no prior legal issues. The entire community of Kitzbühel was in shock over the incident. In this close-knit town, crimes, especially such violent ones, were extremely rare. All the neighbors were familiar with the Nadine family, known for their kindness and helpfulness. They had good relationships with everyone in the area. Both the victim's family and the suspect's family were respected in the community. The community especially mourned the loss of Florian Jani, a talented young hockey player and goalkeeper, who was seen as a promising individual. His compassion for Nadine ultimately led to his tragic death. Friends who knew Nadine well later stated that she had no romantic involvement with Florian. They were simply friends who enjoyed good conversations. However, some speculated that Florian stayed the night to protect her, and suggested that they might have already begun dating. Following the tragedy, a small memorial with photographs of the victims was set up in the local church. Over the course of the month it remained there. More than 1,000 heartfelt notes were left by mourners and caring individuals in memory of the victims. Andreas had been in custody in a special cell designed for inmates needing extra supervision. The police considered him at high risk for end one's own life, so they monitored him closely. He spent 23 hours a day in solitary confinement and was allowed only 1 hour outside to walk in the yard. When the family of Andreas learned what had happened, they addressed the town's residents, expressed their condolences. They also informed the police that a gun belonging to Andreas's brother was missing. The brother had a permit for the firearm, which he kept at home for self-defense. Unfortunately, Andreas knew how to access it and where the key to the safe was. The gun's serial numbers matched, and Andreas confirmed that he had stolen the gun from the house. At a press conference, Andreas's parents expressed their belief that he should face appropriate consequences for his actions. They mentioned that their son's mental health had declined while he was in prison. Despite widespread public anger, the family attempted to explain Andreas's behavior. His father stated that Andreas had been struggling with depression, particularly following his breakup with Nadine. His mother added that while her son might have had mental health challenges, it is unclear why he and his family never pursued mental health treatment. Andreas faces charges for murdering 5 people with a firearm and for breaking and entering. Andreas's lawyer intends to base their defense on his client's questionable mental state. Andreas claims that after hearing hurtful remarks from Nadine and her brother, who attempted to force him out of the house, he lost touch with reality and was unable to control his actions. He states that the only thought in his mind was his desire to kill the cheater. He described this experience as a state of emotional turmoil. The lawyer hoped this would reduce his client's culpability. However, the prosecution argued that Andreas was merely pretending and insisted that he was aware of his actions, he fit to stand trial. The lawyer disagreed with this assessment. In the end, the court ruled that there were no grounds for reducing Andreas's criminal responsibility. Andreas believed he deserved a fair punishment and did not want to evade responsibility for his crime. From the outset, He intended to confess. He willingly went to the police station and had no plans to take back his confession made the morning after the massacre. His lawyers stressed Andreas's mental state during the case. Assessments revealed that he suffered from a disorder that left him with two choices: either walk away and forget or return to kill. There was no middle ground. Once he understood that he could not regain his relationship with Nadine, he became obsessed with the notion that Nadine should not belong to anyone. As soon as the murder trial started, Andreas confessed to the crime. He believed that confessing would make the legal process easier and reduce trauma for the victims' families, as well as for himself. He shared details about his relationship with Nadine, discussing his jealousy and the reasons behind his actions. He described Nadine as an attractive girl who attracted many admirers, which fueled his jealousy. Andreas held traditional views about women and felt that a good woman should behave differently. He couldn't accept Nadine's decision to break up, insisting that she was his property and that she shouldn't date or spend time with other men, even as just friends. On the night of the incident, he was also affected by Kevin's betrayal. Nadine's parents were annoyed with Andreas, and he was afraid of losing her entire family, with whom he felt closer than to his own. He claimed that after the breakup, his family did not provide the support he desperately needed, leading him to lose 10 kilograms. Ultimately, in a moment of rage, Andreas lost control and killed them all. Andreas showed remorse and offered condolences to the families of his victims, but some believed he was merely trying to get a lighter sentence. Prosecution witnesses testified that Nadine continuously told Andreas that their relationship was over. Despite this, he kept asking for another chance, hoping to get back together, and he stalked her without truly grasping the situation. During the hearing, Andreas came across as insecure. He spoke softly, often mumbling to himself, and cried during emotional moments. At times, he seemed to misunderstand the gravity of what happened, viewing it as an accident. The prosecution contended that there was clear evidence of a brutal, premeditated murder involving 5 victims. They argued that Andreas had ample time to think through his actions as he drove to and from his ex-girlfriend's house. When he returned home, he took 3 items: a gun, a knife, and a baseball bat, indicating that he had meticulously planned his actions. The choice to take a knife suggested he intended to ensure there would be no survivors among Nadine's family and her friend Florian. During the hearing, the prosecution pointed out that Andreas had changed his marital status on social media from engaged to widower. Andreas claimed that this change occurred shortly after Nadine's murder, but some friends and acquaintances suggested that Andreas may have done so intentionally beforehand. Just a few months after their breakup, he started reacting more aggressively to Nadine's rejections. He often expressed a desire for her to be dead and sent messages accusing her of dating someone new, voicing a wish to kill that person. At the time, these statements were not taken seriously. The lawyer argued that these were simply emotional responses to rejection, which Andreas struggled to accept. However, this did not necessarily mean he intended to kill her. Nadine's friends mentioned that she had been feeling fearful of her ex lately and had been trying to avoid him as much as she could. She discovered that Andreas had been engaging in violent acts, such as beheading chickens with a machete and torturing cats. His actions appeared to be quite dangerous. During the trial, the defendant struggled to answer many questions, especially regarding why, in addition to Nadine, her friend Florian, brother Kevin, and her parents were killed. The lawyer argued that this showed Andreas lacked control over his actions and didn't fully grasp what was happening. However, the Austrian justice system made a definitive ruling: the murder of 5 people could not be seen as a mitigating factor. The idea that Andreas was insane was dismissed. By the end of the trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Nevertheless, this doesn't mean he will be incarcerated for life. In Austria, individuals with life sentences are often released after an average of 21 years. Furthermore, the lawyer vowed to continue advocating for his client's release and planned to file appeals. On July 29, 2016, Gabriella and her younger sister, Sunilda, started their day as usual. That evening, they planned to visit a nearby internet cafe to work on some school assignments. Because they didn't have internet at home, these trips to the local cafe had become a regular part of their lives. Going to the cafe was how they accessed the internet to stay connected and complete their assignments. Around 6 p.m., Gabriella and Sunilda left the house as usual, without causing any concern. But after walking a few blocks, Gabriella abruptly changed her mind. She told Sunilda that she wouldn't be accompanying her and that she was going to see her boyfriend instead. Sunilda was a little surprised but didn't ask any questions. Gabriella had gone off alone before. Gabriella assured her she would return soon, then walked away in the opposite direction. That was the last time the two sisters saw each other. Sunilda went to the cafe by herself. That evening, when she got home, she realized that Gabriella still wasn't back yet. Al principio, nadie le dio mucha importancia. Es como que los adolescentes se queden fuera hasta tarde, especialmente en verano. Sin embargo, a medida que anochecia, la preocupación empezó a aumentar. Liliana, their mother, tried to call Gabriella but got no answer. She sent messages on WhatsApp, which at first were not read. Later, the messages appeared as read, but Gabriella never replied. It was clear someone was seeing the messages, but not responding. Panic set in when a young man, whom the family believed to be Gabriella's boyfriend, showed up at their door. He asked a question that stunned everyone, because they had all assumed that Gabriella was with him. His confusion seemed real. He truly didn't know where she was. That moment changed everything. Until then, everyone had just thought Gabriella was out later than usual. If her boyfriend hadn't seen her that night, it's possible she never made it to meet him. That's when her family realized something was wrong. Sunilda remembered watching Gabriella turn a corner in the direction of a boarding house where one of their relatives had once lived. At the time, it hadn't seemed significant. The next morning, it was obvious that Gabriella was missing. Her phone was still active, but she didn't answer any calls. The mood at home grew tense. Her loved ones started reaching out to everyone they knew, relatives, friends, even her father, but nobody knew where she was. It seemed as though she had vanished without a trace. The family decided to take official action. Liliana contacted the local authorities, who then opened the missing person case. Soon after, flyers about the case were posted around the neighborhood. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers helped with the search. However, after Gabriella turned the corner and left her sister behind, no one saw her again. Gabriella Verol was born in Argentina in 1998 to Bolivian parents. Her parents separated when she was 6 years old. After her parents separated, Gabriella lived with her mother, Liliana Cham, and later started calling another man, Cesar Garcia, her father. He became her stepfather. Sunilda and other relatives from Liliana's family also lived in the same house. Life at home was difficult. The family made great efforts to create a stable home and meet their basic needs, but the atmosphere was often tense and arguments happened frequently. Gabriella frequently had stressful encounters with her grandmother, and their arguments were much more heated than typical family disputes. The adults were emotionally distant and didn't understand her, which constantly made her feel under pressure. During her teenage years, Gabriella faced the typical challenges of growing up. However, living in a home without personal space or privacy made these difficulties even harder for her. She didn't have a good place to rest or study. She dreamed of living with her biological father, who lived apart from her with another family. Pero ese deseo nunca se cumplió. Al no mantuvo una comunicación constante y también estaba enfrentando sus propios problemas personales. Eventually, the situation at home became too difficult for Gabriella to handle. She decided to leave, taking her younger sister Sunilda with her. For a time, they stayed at the house of their Aunt Marisol, their father's sister. The two sisters hadn't planned to leave permanently or thought it through carefully, but their leaving was a sign that something was wrong. They stayed at their aunt's house for about a week. Life there was more peaceful and there was less strict adult supervision, but this brief period didn't result in any lasting changes. When Gabriella returned to her mother's house, she once again found herself surrounded by the same pressure and stress she had tried to get away from. Although Gabriella was quiet, she was clearly independent. She wore simple clothes, avoided drawing attention to herself, and stayed away from noisy or boisterous groups. However, she was still ambitious. She often envisioned a future in which she could shape her own life. Unfortunately, her limited resources made it difficult to pursue those dreams. She didn't have a computer or reliable internet access at home. Even basic things like homework required her to walk to the nearest internet cafe. As mentioned before, this demanded extra planning and often led to more stress at home. In addition to these daily difficulties, Gabriella also felt a strong sense of emotional distance. Her opinions were often ignored, and her needs were rarely prioritized. Even within her own family, she felt more like an outsider than a real member. She never openly argued with her mother, Liliana. However, Liliana was always so overwhelmed by her responsibilities that she often didn't notice what her daughter was experiencing. Gabriella's stepfather fulfilled his duties, but they never developed a close relationship. There was always a distance between them. Over the years, all of this made Gabriella feel increasingly isolated. She didn't feel safe at home, and she couldn't see any realistic way to find support or make a change outside of it. Life felt like a cycle she couldn't escape, where any progress depended entirely on her own efforts. At home, there was a shortage of resources, emotional support, and space for her to grow. Her desire for independence was no longer just a normal part of growing up, it became a true necessity. This mindset began to guide her choices and actions over time. Against this emotionally vulnerable but outwardly calm backdrop, a series of events began to unfold. These events would eventually lead to devastating consequences. Esther Quintana, born in 1986, was married to Elizabeth Cham, who is Gabriella's maternal aunt. This marriage made Esther a member of Gabriella's family, and they frequently saw each other, as they lived in the same household. For a long time, no one in the family had any concerns about his behavior. They saw him as calm, reliable, and responsible, with a respectable job at the Argentine Prefecture, a federal security agency. He didn't raise any red flags. He stayed out of arguments, helped with household chores, and was present at family gatherings. He was a quiet part of everyday life. He lived with his wife and her family, ate meals with them, took part in family gatherings, and helped with daily chores. To those around him, he seemed like a reliable and discreet adult who handled family matters appropriately and never overstepped his boundaries. Over time, small, isolated incidents began to occur, minor things that didn't seem concerning at first, such as a strange remark or an odd situation. There was no single event, but these details gradually changed how people saw him. After he and Elizabeth separated, Esther left the family home. He moved into a low-cost boarding house near the area where his family still lived. At the time, his relatives thought this was simply the usual thing to do after a marriage ended. This move marked a turning point. It began a new phase in which his behavior slowly changed from neutral to unsettling, even though no one could clearly describe why they felt uneasy. Even though Esther no longer lived with the family, he still kept in touch with them, especially with Gabriella. As time passed, people started noticing that he was spending more and more time alone with her. These meetings took place outside the home, in neutral locations. Neighbors who witnessed these interactions were unsure how to interpret them. One man remembered seeing Gabriella and Esther together on a bus. Gabriella was sitting on Esther's lap while he softly stroked her hair. The man felt uncomfortable watching this but chose not to mention it to the family. He later admitted that he hesitated because he was afraid of causing a scene or damaging family relationships. He decided not to say anything. Other people in the neighborhood reported seeing similar things. Several residents had seen Gabriella near the boarding house where Esther lived. At times, she would go into the building, remain there for an hour or two, and then leave quietly. No one expressed any concern when this happened. Because Esther had once been married to Gabriella's aunt, no one thought their interactions were unusual at first. Their family relationship led people to trust them and not question their meetings. Gabriella never told anyone she visited him, and there was no obvious reason to suspect anything improper was happening. They also had no formal relationship. Esther was not her guardian and had no legal right to be involved in her life. However, he was still somewhat connected to the family, so his actions were considered personal decisions and were not subject to supervision. Gabriella's family didn't keep track of where she was, believing she was either with friends or running errands. It was later revealed that many of their meetings took place at the boarding house where Nestor had rented a small room. He often invited Gabriella there, and they kept their visits private. She would arrive by herself and leave without drawing attention. Over time, their relationship changed in ways that went beyond simple familial affection. At the time, however, none of the adults realized how deep their connection had become. Even after his marriage to Elizabeth ended, Gabriella continued to seek contact with him. She never talked about what happened during those visits or shared any details with anyone. Only after she disappeared did people begin to understand the whole story, the clues they had previously missed. At first, there was no clear indication that Gabriella had any reason to keep secrets. She seemed calm and friendly around her relatives, but it later became clear that her relationship with Nestor was something she could not discuss openly. Reportedly, their connection began when Gabriella was just 13. At that point, Nestor was already a grown man, employed in a federal security role and married to her maternal aunt, which made the situation even more troubling. He was not just a stranger, he was a trusted adult in her home, connected to her family, and seen as safe by everyone around her. The first details of this story began to emerge when the investigation started. Friends who had never shown much interest in Gabriella's personal life began to comment. Several people admitted that they had suspected for years that something was wrong between her and Nestor. Some recalled seeing him repeatedly near Gabriella's school, offering her rides or finding reasons to be there. At first, his actions appeared to be motivated by concern, but over time they became more obsessive. The way he behaved was not what you would normally expect from a family member. He monitored her social life, tracked whom she spoke to, and showed signs of jealousy. Gabriella tried to maintain normal friendships, but Nestor's influence made her feel increasingly restricted. People close to her said that he constantly tried to contact her, often calling her repeatedly if she didn't answer immediately. Those who witnessed how urgently he needed to know her whereabouts at all times recognized this as a warning sign. In later messages used as evidence, he accused her of being distant, demanded explanations for her actions, and insisted that she account for how she spent her time when she wasn't with him. These were not isolated incidents, they formed a consistent pattern of controlling and obsessive behavior. Classmates remembered times when Gabriella would only attend events if he gave her permission. Initially, it appeared as if she was simply dealing with strict family rules or a difficult home situation. No one realized that the true reason was the pressure from an adult man who maintained a controlling environment around her. A close friend later recalled that Gabriella had once confided in her, saying she hadn't felt free in a long time and asking her to keep it a secret. At the time, it seemed like something typical a teenager might say. Later, those words would take on much deeper significance. Through the voice messages Nestor sent Gabriella, investigators made a disturbing discovery. He saw her as someone he possessed. In the recordings, his tone shifted between pleading and demanding. He accused her of cheating, doubted her honesty, and repeatedly insisted that she prove her loyalty. When Gabriella began spending time with someone her own age, Nestor started to act increasingly hostile. He made it clear that he could not tolerate her being close to anyone else, not even her friends. The investigation found that this caused tensions between them to escalate even further during that period. As Gabriella grew more distant, Nestor intensified his efforts to regain control. Meanwhile, her friends noticed that Gabriella's emotional well-being was deteriorating. She became increasingly anxious and withdrawn, and she stopped talking about her future. When she tried to leave Nestor, he responded by ramping up his manipulation. He pressured her psychologically, used emotional blackmail, made threats, and tried to make her feel guilty. Relatives living nearby had no idea this was happening. As investigators examined his actions more closely, a clear pattern emerged. He not only violated personal boundaries, but also purposely created a relationship of dependence by taking advantage of his age, his authority, and the trust the family placed in him. Gabriella's friends later confessed that, while they sensed something was wrong, they did not realize the seriousness of the situation. She remained silent out of fear, shame, and the conviction that no one would believe her if she told the truth. This silence allowed Nestor to maintain control over her for years. Gabriella grew up in a home without adequate support, which left her vulnerable. A man, initially only a relative, entered her life and gradually became a dominant presence from whom she could not escape. This situation paved the way for the tragedy that followed. After Gabriella went missing, the police launched an initial investigation. They questioned her sister, her mother, the young man she was dating, and several other acquaintances. Officers began searching the neighborhood and spoke with residents living within a few blocks of where Gabriella was last seen with her sister. Several witnesses reported seeing her later that evening walking down the street with a man. One witness specifically remembered seeing them heading toward the boarding house. Investigators believe that, given the time and place, Gabriella may have intentionally gone there. Meanwhile, some of Gabriella's friends, previously too afraid to speak up, began providing information. As more evidence was gathered, it became clear that Gabriella's disappearance was not accidental. There were no signs that she had run away or made a sudden decision to leave. She left without taking any belongings or informing anyone of her plans. After Nestor Quintana was identified as a person of interest, authorities brought him in for questioning. Initially, he appeared confident. He claimed he had not been in contact with the family for a long time, that he no longer knew anything about Gabriella's life, and that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. He explained that he stayed out of family matters because he and Elizabeth were divorced. At first, his answers seemed consistent. However, investigators soon found several contradictions. Neighbors and other residents reported seeing Nestor still meeting with Gabriella. Witnesses often saw them together near the boarding house, and her friends stated he behaved in a controlling manner, evidence that directly contradicted his previous statements. The investigators intensified their questioning. Nestor was summoned for additional interviews, and with each session, he grew less confident. He began muddling the timeline, changing his story, and avoiding direct questions. Even those who had initially believed he was not involved began to have doubts. The situation shifted noticeably a few days after the investigation gained momentum. Nestor arrived at the police station without prior notice and asked to speak with an officer. This time, he admitted to having had contact with Gabriella and claimed to know where she was. Then he made a confession that changed the whole investigation. He stated that, as on previous occasions, he met with Gabriella on the evening of July 29th. According to him, they had an argument that night. Nestor said the argument escalated and, during the struggle, he lost control and accidentally killed Gabriella by strangling her. He revealed the precise location of her body, explaining that he had hidden it in his room at the boarding house, wrapped in bed sheets and plastic. He claimed that he had acted impulsively during an emotional breakdown and had not planned the act in advance. Police quickly proceeded to the location he mentioned. There, in the room he had rented, investigators discovered Gabriella's body. It was carefully wrapped in several layers of fabric and plastic bags and placed in the corner of the room. Forensic specialists arrived at the scene, determining that the body had been in the room for several days. However, because the room was sealed, decomposition had been limited. Investigators collected all nearby items for forensic examination. An initial autopsy determined that the cause of death was manual strangulation. No signs of sexual assault were found, so investigators ruled out such a motive. However, the main question remained unanswered. If the motive was not sexual assault, what provoked such a violent reaction? Some believe the act resulted from long-term emotional stress, jealousy, and an adult's inability to accept Gabriella's growing independence. Only further interviews and psychological assessments could confirm whether this theory was correct. The authorities informed Gabriella's family of Nestor's confession. The shock was immense. Her mother, stepfather, and other relatives could not believe that someone they had lived with was capable of such an act. Nestor, once regarded as a caring uncle, had now admitted to causing her death. For many people, the news was more than just devastating. It completely destroyed their trust in those closest to them. Cesar Garcia, Gabriella's stepfather, told reporters that he was struggling to understand what had happened. He said that Nestor had never acted suspiciously and was always seen as a trustworthy, ordinary family member. Gabriella's sister, Sunsilda, did not make any public statements and remained in shock. Their mother was so overwhelmed by emotion that she burst into tears. The family's grief was made even worse by a profound sense of betrayal. Although Nestor confessed, the investigation continued. Law enforcement needed to confirm whether his statements were true and to ensure he was not withholding any other information. His claim that his actions were caused by an emotional outburst was questionable, especially since he had carefully concealed the body. Investigators also looked into whether Nestor was trying to minimize his role in order to receive a reduced sentence. This issue became part of the case as it proceeded to trial. After Gabriella's body was found and a confession was made, Nestor Quintana's case entered the formal criminal investigation stage, and he was officially charged. However, during the very first court hearing, the situation changed unexpectedly when Nestor suddenly retracted his confession. He stated that the police had pressured him, used psychological coercion, and had not properly informed him of his rights. This new statement formed the basis of his defense strategy. Nestor's lawyer promptly took action to dispute all evidence that had been gathered from the confession. He claimed that the boarding house was searched illegally because there was no valid warrant. The defense also requested the exclusion of text messages, voice recordings, and witness testimonies that were collected before a lawyer was present. They argued that Nestor was mentally unstable at the time and could not understand the consequences of his words. Prosecutors remained resolute. The lead attorney stressed that Nestor's confession was both voluntary and detailed. He also pointed out that Nestor provided exact directions to where Gabriella's body was found, arguing that such specific information could not have been a coincidence. Furthermore, evidence was collected that revealed a long-term pattern of control by the accused over Gabriella, including indications of psychological manipulation and jealousy. A key piece of evidence was finding Nestor's DNA under Gabriella's fingernails, which clearly showed there had been a physical struggle. Several witnesses testified in court. Gabriella's friends spoke about the emotional distress she experienced in the months before she disappeared, describing how Nestor tried to control her, limited her social interactions, and put her under significant emotional pressure. During the proceedings, a message was read aloud in which Nestor made threats. The content had a significant impact on the jury, prompting the defense to adjust its strategy. They described Nestor as someone who was emotionally unstable and acted impulsively due to extreme stress. They stated that his relationship with Gabriella was mutual but unofficial, and that what happened was not premeditated. These claims angered Gabriella's family. Her stepfather, in particular, spoke out after several hearings, saying that attempts to defend the accused were disrespectful to Gabriella's memory. During the trial, Gabriella's mother, Liliana, remained composed and attended every session. The family was clear and united in saying that this was not a domestic dispute. It was a betrayal that ended a life already controlled and suppressed. Their lawyers argued that this was not only a breach of trust, but Nestor's position as a family member made it even worse. The prosecution requested the harshest penalty, life in prison, because of the seriousness of the crime. They pointed to the close family relationship between those involved, the long-term psychological manipulation, and the deliberate effort to conceal the body. Once both sides gave their closing arguments, the jury was sent out to deliberate and make their decision. Tension filled the courtroom. Gabriella's family sat quietly, anxiously awaiting the verdict. When the jury returned, the foreperson announced the decision, guilty of first-degree murder, with aggravating factors due to the family relationship and gender-based violence. The judge delivered the sentence without delay. Nestor Quintana was sentenced to life imprisonment. The court dismissed the defense's argument that the confession was coerced, noting that it contained detailed information and was supported by physical evidence. The fact that there had also been long-term psychological control made the charges even more serious. Nestor remained expressionless as the verdict was announced. His lawyers sat in silence, staring at the floor. Across the courtroom, Gabriella's mother began to cry, and her husband held her in his arms. This was not a victory, but a painful farewell. Justice had been served, yet their daughter was lost forever. It was a quiet evening in Dallas when Amber Geiger, a seasoned police officer, entered the wrong apartment. What happened next would send shockwaves through the community and change the course of two families' lives forever. But was it truly a tragic mistake, or was something darker at play? As the courtroom drama unfolded, questions about race, power, and accountability took center stage. What happened that night? Botham Shem Jean was born on September 29, 1991, in Castries, the capital of the island nation of St. Lucia. His parents, Allison and Bertram Jean, were deeply religious, they members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Raised in such a faith-driven environment, Botham's upbringing instilled in him strong moral values, including honesty, tolerance, and a desire to help others. From a young age, Botham stood out among his peers. His parents raised him with a strong sense of responsibility, a focus on education. In school, he demonstrated exceptional abilities in mathematics and music. At a young age, Botham began singing in the church choir, where his deep and moving voice immediately caught attention. Music became an important part of his life, and the church was a place where he felt supported. After finishing school, Botham decided to continue his education in the United States. He chose to attend Harding University in Texas, where he pursued a degree in accounting. This decision marked an important milestone in his life. Moving to the U.S. opened up new opportunities for professional growth and personal connections. After graduation, Botham secured a job as an accountant in Dallas. His career quickly flourished, his colleagues highly valued his professionalism and work ethic. For Botham, working at PricewaterhouseCoopers wasn't just a career step, it was an opportunity to contribute to society and provide for his family. He supported his parents, helped the youth in his community in St. Lucia. He dreamed of advancing further in his career. His co-workers remembered him as someone who always brought positivity and inspiration to the team. But it wasn't just his professional life that mattered to Botham. He was actively involved in the life of his church in Dallas, where he was part of the music group and often spent time with friends from the community. He found joy in simple things like cooking dinners for his friends, organizing parties to maintain friendships, and support with others. His life was filled with plans for the future. Amber Geiger, on the other hand, came from a small town near Dallas. She was born on August 9, 1988, grew up in a family where discipline and hard work were strongly emphasized. From an early age, Amber dreamed of becoming a police officer. Her father worked in local law enforcement, and she knew she wanted to follow in his footsteps to help people, bring order to society. She pursued this dream after high school by enrolling in the police academy. She worked hard and demonstrated the discipline, focus needed for a career in law enforcement. After graduating from the academy, Amber began her career with the Dallas Police Department, where she eventually became an officer. Her colleagues described her as determined and hardworking, though she often expressed frustration with the emotional strain and high stress of her job. The life of a police officer is always filled with risk and stress. Amber was no exception. She often found herself in situations that required quick decisions, where her reaction had to be immediate. These working conditions took a toll on her emotional state. Over time, she became more withdrawn and cautious in her relationships with others, preferring to spend her free time alone to recharge. Amber Geiger was dedicated to her profession, but her life was full of contradictions. She tried to hide her vulnerabilities, but those who knew her well could see that she often felt lonely and sometimes even lost in the world. Despite her strong, determined character, her internal struggles and fatigue from the constant pressure made her life less stable. She would often return home late, exhausted and emotionally drained, which perhaps played a critical role in the tragic events that unfolded later. After moving to Dallas, Amber purchased an apartment in the South Side Flats complex near her job. She believed that living close to work would allow her to rest better and minimize commuting time. Although she intended for her life in Dallas to be a fresh start, it did not bring the peace she sought. Instead, work stress and emotional strain became overwhelming. It started to dominate her daily life. She frequently struggled to cope with her increasing fatigue. On September 6, 2018, Botham Jean began his day like any other. He woke up early, went to his office in downtown Dallas. It was another hectic day filled with meetings and preparing client reports. Botham was known for his dedication to his work. That day was no exception. His colleagues saw his positive attitude and the smile he spread to those around him. No one could have anticipated that this would be the last day of his life. After finishing work, Botham returned to his apartment in the South Side Flats complex in Dallas. For him, this apartment was a peaceful retreat where he could relax after a hectic day. That evening, he opted for a simple routine, cooking dinner, listening to his favorite music, and unwinding. Cooking was a beloved hobby of his, helped him manage the stress from work. On the other hand, Amber Geiger was just completing a 13-hour shift at the police station. That day had been particularly challenging, filled with calls, patrolling, and paperwork that left her completely exhausted. She felt an overwhelming fatigue that made every part of her body heavy. She just wanted to get home quickly and sleep. As soon as her shift ended, Amber rushed home, looking forward to collapsing into bed for some much-needed rest. Amber arrived at her apartment complex, where she lived on the 3rd floor. As she made her way to her apartment, she was distracted by messages on her phone, recalling her day. She accidentally took the elevator to the 4th floor instead of the 3rd. The apartment doors looked similar, and in her fatigue, she didn't realize she was at the wrong unit. She noticed that the door to Botham Jean's apartment was slightly open, which made her uneasy. Confused and tired, she feared that someone might have broken into her apartment. Amber took out her service weapon, focused only on the need to protect herself. Amber pushed the door open, stepped inside. Botham, who was in his apartment preparing dinner, heard the noise and turned to the door, feeling confused about what was occurring. Mistaking him for an intruder, Amber fired her gun twice without thinking. Botham collapsed to the floor. When Amber turned on the lights, she realized her mistake. She saw an unfamiliar man lying in a pool of blood, suddenly understood that she had entered the wrong apartment. Overcome by panic and horror, she rushed to Botham to try to help him. She called 911, urgently explaining the situation to the operator, desperately stating that she had entered the wrong apartment unit and had shot someone. Her voice shook with fear and regret as she begged Botham to hold on, repeatedly saying she hadn't intended for this to happen. While waiting for emergency services, Amber tried to stop the bleeding, but her attempts were unsuccessful. Neighbors, alarmed by the gunshots and cries, began to enter the hallway. Some called the police to report the gunfire coming from the apartment complex. When paramedics arrived, they worked to save Botham, but his injuries were too severe. He did not survive. That evening, a young man with a bright future had his life tragically cut short. After the shooting, Amber was arrested and placed in the patrol car of Dallas Police Sergeant Brianna Valentine. Sergeant Mike Mata, Valentine's superior and president of the Dallas Police Association, then approached her. He instructed Valentine to turn off the in-car camera, which recorded audio, so he could speak privately with Amber. Valentine complied with this request. During Amber's trial, Mata testified that it was standard procedure to turn off the camera to protect Amber's attorney-client privilege, as she intended to call her attorney. Amber's defense attorney supported Mata's claim, but prosecutors disagreed, arguing that turning off the camera was inappropriate and suggested that Amber received preferential treatment due to her status as a police officer. Valentine testified that she locked Amber in the patrol car to prevent her from being implicated. However, surveillance footage later showed Mata allowing Amber to exit the patrol car, conversing with her and permitting her to mingle with friends and other officers. At the time, Dallas police policy allowed officers to deactivate recording devices if they believed there would be no further evidence or law enforcement value. Botham's family and the community claimed that turning off the camera led to the loss of important evidence. Valentine stated she would not have turned off the camera had she realized Amber was off-duty during the shooting. Mata denied any wrongdoing and expressed openness to an internal affairs investigation. In July 2020, prosecutors referred Mata to a grand jury for tampering with evidence, but the grand jury chose not to indict him. A spokesperson for the Dallas police stated that an internal affairs investigation into Mata's conduct would continue. As investigators collected evidence, the public started to engage in discussions about the incident. The case led to widespread outrage, particularly regarding racial issues and concerns about police misconduct. Botham Jean, being black, was viewed by many as another victim of unfair treatment and bias from law enforcement. This raised questions about whether Botham's race influenced Amber's mistaken belief that he was an intruder, which led her to shoot him without first assessing the situation. Botham's family was heartbroken by the tragedy. His mother, Allison Jean, was in St. Lucia when she received the news. It was a devastating moment for her. Her son, who had moved to the U.S. to create a better life, was killed in his own apartment. Allison started to seek justice for her son, urging both the public and authorities to conduct a thorough and fair investigation. She remembered Botham as a kind, responsible, dedicated person who never posed any threat to others. In the days after the incident, there was a surge of conflicting reports and rumors. The media provided extensive coverage. Public opinion was sharply divided. Some people felt that Amber Guyger had made a tragic error, while others believed her actions were influenced by bias and a poor assessment of the situation. This led to protests in Dallas and other cities, where demonstrators called for justice for Botham Jean and his family. Witnesses from the apartment complex reported hearing screams and gunshots. Some tried to understand what was happening, but no one anticipated such a tragic outcome. Investigators gathered evidence, reviewed surveillance footage, and analyzed witness statements to piece together the events of that day. They aimed to determine if this was truly a tragic mistake or if other factors played a role in the devastating result. After Amber's arrest, the case moved into a lengthy, complex phase of investigation and trial preparation. Amber was charged with manslaughter. Her attorneys argued that her actions were a tragic, unintentional mistake due to extreme exhaustion from a long shift. However, the prosecution asserted that Amber's behavior was unacceptable for a trained police officer who should carefully assess situations and avoid unnecessary use of force. Key evidence in the case included surveillance footage from the apartment complex where Botham Jean and Amber Guyger lived. The recordings showed Amber arriving at the building, mistakenly going to the wrong floor, and approaching Botham's apartment. Investigators highlighted that she did not pay enough attention to realize she was on the wrong floor. Additionally, phone records were significant. Just before the incident, Amber had been texting a colleague with whom she had a personal relationship. Prosecutors argued that these messages might have distracted her and led to her mistake in entering the wrong apartment. In contrast, the defense minimized the relevance of the texts, asserting that they were unrelated to the incident and could not have impacted her actions. Over several months, investigators collected evidence and interviewed witnesses. Neighbors in the apartment complex reported hearing shouting and gunshots. Some mentioned hearing voices before the shots were fired, indicating there might have been an argument between Amber and Botham. However, the witnesses had differing accounts, making it challenging to create a clear understanding of the events that took place. Forensic examinations were carried out simultaneously. Experts carefully studied the firearm involved in the shooting, the bullet's trajectory, and other physical evidence to establish the locations of Amber and Botham during the incident. A key point of debate was the position of Botham's body and the bullet's angle. The prosecution argued that the evidence indicated Botham was not a threat to Amber, whereas the defense maintained that she acted in self-defense. In September 2019, a widely publicized trial began, attracting significant attention from the public and media. The courtroom was filled with journalists, family members, and friends of Botham Jean, along with supporters of both the prosecution and defense. The case was expected to be complex, addressing issues of police responsibility, personal accountability, and racial justice. The trial commenced with opening statements from both sides. Prosecutors contended that Amber Guyger's actions were not merely a mistake, but rather a result of her negligence as a police officer. They stressed that any officer should be especially cautious when using a firearm, particularly in situations where there is no threat. Moreover, they highlighted that Botham was in his own home and did not pose any danger to Amber. The defense focused on the notion that Amber was extremely exhausted and confused, motivated by fear for her own safety. Her lawyers aimed to present her as someone who made a tragic error without any intention to harm. They also emphasized her clean record in law enforcement to gain sympathy from the jury. Over several weeks, various witnesses, experts, and family members of both the defendant and the victim shared their testimonies. A particularly emotional moment in the trial occurred when Botham's mother, Allison Jean, took the witness stand. She reminisced about her son's dreams and future aspirations, painting him as a kind, compassionate individual. Her heartfelt words resonated deeply with everyone in the courtroom, underlining the immense loss her family experienced. Botham's brother, Brant Jean, also testified, delivering a statement that became widely discussed. He publicly forgave Amber Guyger, even requested to hug her. This act elicited mixed reactions. While some viewed it as a remarkable display of kindness and forgiveness, others believed it should not overshadow the pursuit of justice. Among the evidence shown in court were surveillance video and an audio recording of Amber's 911 call made after the attack. In the recording, she sounds panicked, repeatedly saying she entered the wrong apartment and never meant to harm anyone. Expert witnesses analyzed the bullet's trajectory, the position of Botham Jean's body, and the events leading up to the shooting. Prosecution experts argued that the bullet's path indicated Botham was in a relaxed position, likely sitting or just getting up from his couch when he was shot. This contradicted the defense's claim that he was moving toward Amber and posed a threat. The defense tried to challenge these findings by saying that the bullet's trajectory could not be definitively established due to insufficient data. During the trial, the public paid close attention to the case's developments. Protests and rallies persisted, with activists demanding a fair sentence for Amber Guyger, advocating for police reform to prevent similar incidents in the future. There were widespread calls for improvements in police training, particularly in decision-making during high-pressure situations, and for greater accountability for errors that result in tragic consequences. Amber Guyger testified, sharing her perspective on the events from that night. She described returning home after a long shift, she feeling exhausted, confused. She claimed she truly thought she was in her own apartment, believed Botham was an intruder. While testifying, she became emotional and stated that she never meant to harm anyone and considered it a terrible mistake, one that she would have to live with forever. Her testimony was heartfelt and appeared genuine to some. The question of what the appropriate sentence should be became a key focus in the final stage of the trial. Prosecutors argued that Amber Guyger should be convicted of manslaughter, stating that her actions resulted in the death of an innocent person and that a police officer who cannot accurately assess a situation should not remain in the police force. In contrast, the defense sought a lighter sentence, emphasizing the absence of intent and claiming that Amber already felt immense guilt for her mistake. After several days of discussion, the jury was finally ready to deliver their verdict in Amber Guyger's case. The courtroom was filled with tension as everyone awaited the judge and jury's decision on whether the former police officer was guilty of causing Botham Jean's death. For many, this trial symbolized not just a personal tragedy but also significant issues in American society, such as racial bias, abuse of power, and a lack of accountability in law enforcement. On October 1, 2019, Amber Guyger was convicted of murder. The jury deliberated for 6 hours to return a murder verdict. The jury also considered the lesser charge of manslaughter. She is the first Dallas police officer to be convicted of murder since the 1973 killing of Santos Rodriguez. This decision surprised many, especially since the prosecution had originally aimed for a manslaughter conviction. The murder charge had more severe penalties and a longer prison sentence. In the courtroom, people expressed relief and held quiet celebrations. This verdict marked an important step toward justice for Botham's family and their supporters who endured the lengthy and difficult trial. On October 2, 2019, Amber Guyger was sentenced to 10 years in prison after a jury deliberated for an hour. In her remarks, the judge acknowledged the case's complexity and tragedy, noting that both sides had suffered significant losses. She pointed out that Guyger had made a serious mistake that resulted in an innocent person's death. Despite the weight of the sentence, many believed that 10 years was too lenient for such a grave error. While some accepted the court's decision, others felt it was inadequate. Activists and supporters of the Jean family argued that the sentence did not adequately reflect the seriousness of the crime and was insufficient punishment for the life lost. Protests continued in Dallas and other cities, with many calling for more reforms in the criminal justice and law enforcement systems. This case became a symbol of the fight for justice and highlighted the ongoing challenges Black Americans face with law enforcement. Amber Guyger was in a state of shock after the verdict and sentencing. She repeatedly insisted that she did not intend to harm anyone and that it was a tragic mistake. Her attorneys filed an appeal to reduce her sentence, arguing that 10 years was too severe for someone who acted out of confusion, stress, and exhaustion. Nevertheless, once the trial ended, Guyger was taken into custody to begin serving her sentence. Botham Jean's family expressed their gratitude to everyone who supported them during the lengthy trial. His mother, Allison, mentioned that while the verdict brought some sense of closure, it could never bring her son back. She stressed the need for systemic reforms in the justice system and law enforcement to prevent similar tragedies in the future. She continued to advocate for changes within police departments, hoping that her son's case would inspire meaningful progress. On October 16, 2019, Amber's attorneys filed an appeal requesting a new trial. On August 7, 2020, they filed another appeal, alleging that there was insufficient evidence to convict her of murder. This appeal sought to have the conviction either overturned or reduced to negligent manslaughter, accompanied by a new hearing for sentencing on the lesser charge. On January 13, 2021, the Dallas City Council voted unanimously to rename approximately 4 miles of South Lamar Street from Interstate 30 to the South Central Expressway as Botham Jean Boulevard. This street passes by Jean's former apartment building and the Dallas Police Headquarters. On August 5, 2021, the Fifth Court of Appeals of Texas upheld Amber Guyger's murder conviction, unanimously concluding that the jury's verdict was reasonable and that Amber's own testimony supported the murder conviction. On November 17 of that year, the court withdrew its earlier opinion but again upheld her murder conviction on similar grounds, stating that her defense, which claimed she had accidentally entered the wrong apartment, did not justify the lesser charge of negligent manslaughter. Her appeal to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, the highest court for criminal cases in the state, was denied. Simultaneously, in response to the police car camera controversy, Texas State Representative Carl O. Sherman sponsored Texas House Bill 929, known as the Botham Jean Act, to increase police accountability. The bill prohibits police from disabling body-worn cameras at any time while they are actively engaged in an investigation. It also requires law enforcement policies regarding body-worn cameras to include provisions for collecting cameras, video, and audio recordings as evidence. The bill goes into effect in September 2021. Amber is currently being held at the Patrick O'Daniel Unit, formerly the Mountain View Unit. She is eligible for release in September 2024 after serving half of her sentence, although her full sentence is effective until September 2029. Amber was subsequently denied parole in October 2024. She will be eligible for release again in 2026. On November 20, 2024, a civil trial jury awarded the Jean family $98.65 million, including approximately $60 million in punitive damages and $38.6 million in compensatory damages, in a wrongful death claim against Amber Guyger, a figure nearly double the amount the family had sought. The family said Dallas police had inadequately trained Amber and also named the city of Dallas as a defendant, but the city was dismissed from the lawsuit, leaving Amber fully liable for the damages. Amber initially represented herself but did not appear in court and declined to provide legal representation. The family said they would donate any compensation they received to the Botham Jean Foundation, which could include proceeds from any film or book deals Amber made. The family acknowledged they were unlikely to receive the full amount. The case of Botham Jean significantly influenced public perception and sparked a national debate about policing. It exemplified the systemic issues present in law enforcement, particularly regarding the treatment of Black individuals. In response to widespread public outcry, many states began to consider new laws aimed at improving police training, especially in how officers handle force and interact with the community. There were increasing demands for greater accountability for police officers and for mandatory training that emphasizes racial and cultural understanding. Furthermore, Botham Jean's case led to the formation of organizations and funds dedicated to assisting the families of victims of police misconduct, advocating for reforms in law enforcement. These groups not only provided legal and emotional support but also launched campaigns to raise awareness about racial discrimination and the misuse of power. Allison actively engaged in these initiatives, sharing her personal story to advocate for justice and systemic change. Meanwhile, Amber Guyger remained in prison, waiting for the results of her appeal. This case devastated two families and had a significant impact on American society. The tragic error that caused Botham Jean's death highlighted the urgent need for reform and emphasized the critical importance of law enforcement officials making careful, responsible decisions in life and death scenarios. The case of Botham Jean and Amber Guyger is one of the most talked about and significant cases in recent U.S. history. It highlights the serious consequences of poor judgment, especially from those in positions of authority. Many believe that justice was only partially served. The case raised important questions about equality and accountability in America. Love can indeed be blind, but sometimes it borders on insanity. In some instances, it is so blind that it prevents one from recognizing the cruelty directed at loved ones. This can lead to truly horrific outcomes. Maya Chappell was born in March 2020. Her mother was Dana Carr, and her father was James Chappell. Dana herself came from a dysfunctional family, where both of her parents struggled with alcohol abuse. Her father was cruel, often beat both his wife and daughter. All of this left a serious mark on Dana's soul. She ran away from her family as soon as she could provide for herself. This decision likely came just in time. Dana's father was convicted of murder. He ended up in prison, while his 17-year-old daughter was in a relationship with James Chappell, who was already 21. Many believed that Dana was too immature for a serious relationship, marriage, and especially motherhood, but she desperately needed love. Additionally, having a boyfriend was an opportunity for her to escape her dangerous family. They got married and were preparing for the birth of their child. Unfortunately, the relationship with James did not allow the young mother to attain what she wanted. Soon after Maya was born, Dana broke up with James in early summer 2022 because she had begun dating Michael Damon. Their relationship developed rapidly, and by the end of August 2022, they had moved in together. Despite James's efforts to distance himself from Dana, Maya stayed with her mother. The new boyfriend was unemployed, and Dana worked almost 7 days a week to support the entire family. Money was tight, so they saved on everything, including childcare and kindergarten. When Dana went to work, she left her daughter with her boyfriend. The girl's father rarely saw his daughter due to the restrictions imposed by Dana. All of this occurred in the small town of Shotton Colliery, UK. Everything seemed to be proceeding normally, and nothing foreshadowed trouble until one day. On September 28, 2022, around 10 a.m., Michael's stepfather stopped by their house. By this time, Dana and Michael had been living together for a month. According to Dana, everything was fine. However, when he arrived, Maya was acting very restlessly, as if she were afraid of Michael. When asked about his suspicious behavior, Michael explained that he had had a dispute over the phone with several banks that were supposed to give him a loan but refused. Things were not going well for him. He tried to solve his financial problems, managed to convince his stepfather that everything was fine and that there was no need to worry. After his stepfather left, Michael began trying to apply for benefits, contacted several more banks and organizations to secure a loan. However, they also denied him due to his lack of employment and income. Later, Michael called Dana, claimed that her daughter had lost consciousness and was having difficulty breathing. Following this call, Michael contacted the UK emergency services to 999. When paramedics and police arrived at the house, they found Maya in critical condition. She was taken to the Great North Children's Hospital, where she remained unconscious as doctors desperately fought to save her life for the next 2 days. Unfortunately, Maya died in the hospital. An autopsy was performed, revealing multiple injuries to Maya's brain, including severe trauma consistent with violent shaking. Medical experts determined that Michael Damon had likely shaken Maya forcefully, contributing to the fatal brain injuries. 5 witnesses stated that these injuries could have resulted from child abuse. The doctors who treated Maya were shocked by the extent of her injuries. She had extensive bruising all over her body, but it was impossible to determine the exact sequence of events leading to her condition. Even in her intimate areas, a large bruise and marks in various stages of healing were found, although there were no signs of sexual assault. Based on the condition of the bruises, it appeared that most of the injuries had been inflicted on September 28. Dana and Michael were questioned separately. Both denied any abuse towards Maya, offered several explanations. They stated that Maya was very energetic, frequently running and falling, which they said was why she had so many bruises. However, doctors disagreed with their claims, stating that it was impossible for the child to have gotten into such a condition on her own. Detectives began investigating the circumstances related to Maya's death. Family members of Michael and Dana reported that Maya had started developing bruises shortly after they began living together. The first bruises were discovered on August 26. On that day, neighbors saw Maya while walking with their children, and it was apparent that she had marks on her head, which she was trying to hide with her hair. The following day, they met with relatives, including Michael's family, who also noticed that Maya was hurt. Dana and Michael explained that Maya had fallen from a slide, and Dana supported this explanation. Although they managed to calm everyone down, it was difficult to believe their story, especially since the bruise was not only on Maya's head but also inside her left ear. It's hard to imagine how such an injury could occur accidentally. Additionally, there were small bruises around her jaw that looked like they were caused by fingers. On September 5th, Michael called his girlfriend at work to inform her that Maya was having trouble breathing. When Dana requested time off to come home, everything appeared to be fine, but new marks had appeared on Maya's body. Michael quickly brushed them off as injuries from accidental falls in the yard where they had been playing while their mother worked. The next day, when Dana took Maya out again, several acquaintances pointed out a noticeable cut on her nose. A few days later, Maya had a split lip. Each time, the explanations were similar: she was running, fell, and got hurt. Maya was briefly entrusted to Dana's mother so her grandmother could spend time with her. That evening, while bathing Maya, her grandmother noticed bruises all over her body. She took a photo of the bruises and sent it to Dana, who then advised her to take Maya to the hospital. Following this advice, she went to the hospital. When the doctor inquired about the bruises, she shared the usual explanation that Maya was clumsy and very active, often bumping into things both indoors and outdoors. The doctor accepted her explanation, and no one reported the situation to the authorities. On September 14th, Maya visited a kindergarten near their home for the first time. The purpose of this visit was to help her adjust to the new environment. Maya enjoyed her time there, but unfortunately, she never returned. Dana, her caregiver, encountered questions from the staff about the marks on Maya's body, which led her to stop bringing Maya to the kindergarten. The teachers even tried to convince Dana to let Maya return, but she declined, saying that Maya either didn't want to go or was unwell. On September 15th, Maya was scheduled to be given to her biological father, James. However, Dana refused to comply, claiming that Maya was sick. Instead, she left the girl with her mother and stepfather. Dana's mother took Maya to a relative who was a trained nurse. That day, they noticed a large, unusual bruise on Maya's buttocks. It had been concealed by her diaper, but once it was removed, the bruise was clearly visible. They asked Dana for an explanation, and she pointed to Michael, who claimed that Maya had bitten herself. This explanation seemed unlikely, so they decided to take some photos to document the odd injury. During a phone conversation with Dana, Michael repeatedly insisted that he was not at fault, even though no one had accused him of anything. Their behavior raised further suspicion. The following weekend, Maya visited her relatives and was observed with new injuries, including 4 bruises on her chest. What stood out most was the calm attitude of her mother, who insisted that the injuries were merely accidents. On September 27th, Maya had gotten another bruise while they were playing outside. Despite these concerning incidents, Dana remained unbothered and continued to go to work each day, leaving Maya alone with Michael. It later emerged that Dana had repeatedly lied to Maya's father, stepfather, mother, kindergarten teachers Maya's health. This deception was aimed at hiding the true person responsible for the bruises, whom detectives believed was Michael. After Maya died, Dana was the first to be questioned and consistently provided false information. To justify her lies, she created a story claiming she was pregnant during Maya's abuse and suffered a miscarriage due to stress when Maya died, which she described as emotional shock. This made it difficult to extract useful information from her. Meanwhile, Michael exhibited immature behavior. He initially blamed Dana's mother for abuse, then his stepfather, and ultimately Maya's biological father. However, detectives were convinced that the ongoing abuse of Maya was linked to him, as her bruises appeared specifically when she was left alone with Michael. The reason for the abuse was quickly understood. Michael was venting his frustration on Maya. This frustration stemmed from his financial troubles and the threats he faced for failing to pay his debts. On September 28, Michael had a particularly difficult day when banned substance dealers confronted him, claiming he owed them a large sum of money. These issues had been mounting for several months. They had been persistently pressing him for repayment. Although he was being followed, he had not yet suffered any physical harm. He managed to assure them once again that he would pay them soon. However, he actually did not have the necessary funds and was desperately trying to find a solution. Michael reached out to social services for assistance, but received no help. He then tried contacting banks, but to no avail. This continuous stream of bad news drove him to a breaking point, and he directed his anger towards the little girl. The incident deeply affected Maya's biological father, James. For the past 2 years, he believed he was trying to protect his daughter from her mother, Dana, whom he saw as unfit to care for his daughter. When Dana filed for divorce, she accused James of being aggressive and cruel, claiming their relationship was toxic. James was concerned that Dana might seek revenge, which could harm Maya. Although Dana could not prove her claims about her ex-husband's aggressive behavior, she was awarded primary custody of their daughter. James was only allowed to visit his daughter on weekends. Initially, Dana tried to restrict communication between James and their child, despite his legal visitation rights. She often found ways to prevent their interactions, avoid bringing their daughter to him. Consequently, James had very limited time with Maya. When he noticed bruises on Maya, he asked Dana about them, but she repeatedly made excuses about accidents. Eventually, she began to limit his visits with Maya even more to evade his questions. James believed that if Dana was not directly involved in the abuse of Maya, she at least supported her boyfriend, who probably was involved. From the start, James suspected something was off about Michael, but Dana presented Maya's relationship with Michael as nearly perfect. She claimed that Michael treated Maya like his own daughter, that they spent all their free time together, going for walks, watching movies, and playing games. When James first noticed bruises on Maya, he immediately checked Michael's name in police databases, suspecting he might have a criminal history. To his surprise, Michael had no record. Despite Dana's reassurances, James witnessed changes in Maya's behavior during their brief visits. She had become disobedient, extremely anxious, cried often, and struggled to sleep. He associated these changes with the negative influence of Dana and Michael, but he lacked concrete evidence. One day, when James went to pick up his daughter from the home she shared with Dana and Michael, he found broken windows. Both claimed that some troublemakers were responsible for the situation, but it soon became clear that the damage was caused by dealers trying to intimidate Michael. On James's next visit, he saw that the house had been vandalized with paint. When James suspected his daughter was being abused, he wanted to collect evidence to formally report the situation. Unfortunately, during this time, Dana severely restricted his communication with Maya. She frequently canceled planned visits, claiming to be sick or saying Maya didn't want to see her father. This left James powerless to protect Maya. It soon became clear that these actions were intentional, aimed at allowing Maya's bruises to heal and preventing any inquiries about them. When Maya finally got to visit her father, Dana continued to make excuses for the new injuries, stating that Maya had been with her grandparents for several days, thus shifting the blame onto them for not watching the girl properly. Unfortunately, James faced challenges when trying to communicate with Maya because of her young age. He wanted to talk about her bruises, but every time he brought it up, she seemed to gesture as if something were breaking and simply said, "D." It wasn't until later that James understood she was referring to Michael by a nickname derived from his last name, Damon. Unfortunately, this information came too late to charge him with abusing the little girl. During the investigation, a lot of relevant information emerged from examining Michael's emails and phone records. It became clear that Dana was unaware of the serious situation and believed Michael's false narratives. He often claimed that Maya had fallen while playing on the playground or bumped into something at home. However, such incidents had never occurred in Maya's life before meeting him. These sudden changes in her behavior didn't raise any alarms for her biological mother, who continued to trust what she was told. The detectives questioned why Dana, considering the strange injuries and her boyfriend's suspicious behavior, had not reached out to a medical center, the police, or other professionals. Dana explained that her lack of action was due to her inexperience. When family members began to ask uncomfortable questions about Maya's injuries, Michael responded by saying that if they didn't stop prying into their affairs, he would no longer babysit Maya. Meanwhile, Dana tried to reassure her boyfriend, claiming that she believed him and rationalizing his actions to protect their relationship. Rather than confronting her doubts about Michael, she continued to defend him. The conversation concluded with Dana expressing her love for him, stating that she trusted him and wanted him to keep babysitting her daughter. Despite being shown pictures of her injured daughter, Dana claimed that without her boyfriend's supervision, Maya would have suffered even more. James was taken aback by his ex-wife's apparent ignorance, but he felt powerless to change the situation. Throughout their relationship, Michael repeatedly assured Dana that he would never harm her daughter, and she never think ill of him. On the day of the incident, when Michael messaged Dana that Maya was choking, Dana concluded their brief exchange by expressing her love for him and her desire not to lose him, showing little concern for her daughter's well-being. When the child was discovered alive at home, there were immediate and serious suspicions of domestic violence. At the medical center, doctors found numerous bruises on Maya's body in various stages of healing, including what looked suspiciously like bite marks. The autopsy revealed that the child had endured repeated beatings with a blunt object, likely inflicted by an adult's fists. Most of the injuries were concentrated around her head and abdomen, suggesting she may have been violently thrown to the floor. The surgeon who attempted to save Maya noted that her injuries resembled those from a fall from a significant height or a high-speed car crash. Only after hearing these alarming assessments did Dana begin to have suspicions. However, detectives believed Dana was feigning ignorance, as Maya's injuries were the result of consistent abuse from Michael, a situation she likely was aware of. Others around her had been discussing the matter and urging her to recognize the reality of the situation. Michael was interrogated but did not confess to any wrongdoing. After Maya died at the medical center, Michael Damon was charged with murder. During a second interrogation, where he was the main suspect, he continued to deny any guilt. He portrayed his relationship with Maya as loving and claimed he never yelled or swore at her. Michael said he noticed Maya was unwell on the day she stopped breathing. They had been playing Xbox together, and then she went to her bedroom while he continued to play. About 10 minutes later, he heard a loud thud from her room. Upon entering, he found Maya lying motionless on the floor. It looked like she had fallen out of bed twice. He immediately noticed Maya's irregular breathing and called Dana at home, then contacted emergency services. This explanation seemed unconvincing. The detectives interviewed a young man who had visited their home earlier that morning. He was disturbed by Maya's behavior and initially wanted to take her with him. He described her as crying, calling for her mother, looking frightened, and even trying to hide when she saw Michael, indicating she felt uncomfortable around him. When Michael spoke to the young man about the situation, Michael assured him that everything was fine and that there was nothing to worry about. Nevertheless, the young man managed to record a video that showed Maya's unusual behavior, which was later presented in court to contradict Michael's statements. The detectives uncovered numerous calls related to Michael's financial issues and were alarmed by their timing. Michael had temporarily left Maya alone to request loan on his mobile phone, showing a complete disregard for her well-being. Investigators also discovered that Michael was unfaithful to his girlfriend, Dana, as he had a profile on an online dating site and date other women while in a relationship with her. Additionally, Michael was taking steroids along with other prohibited substances, which likely exacerbated his aggressive behavior and emotional instability, leading him to lose control at times. This situation caused trouble for Maya. Dana was ultimately arrested, charged with cruelty toward her daughter for her indifference to the domestic abuse, and chose to stand by Michael instead of leaving him. In October 2023, the trial began. During the trial, Dana expressed that she had been so infatuated with her boyfriend that it blinded her to the reality of the situation. She failed to recognize the harm Michael was causing her daughter and did not believe her loved ones when they tried to warn her. Dana said she didn't fully grasp the consequences of Michael's actions. Many suspected that she was merely trying to avoid prison. During the hearing, the defense attorney attempted to present Dana as a victim of long-term familial abuse, particularly from her father. He highlighted that she had experienced violence throughout her childhood. Ultimately, the attorney's arguments might have evoked some sympathy from the jury, but they did not excuse her lack of concern for Maya. During the trial, Dana expressed discomfort at being in the same room with Michael. She contradicted her previous statements with another falsehood. Initially, she claimed to have suffered a miscarriage after Maya's death. Now, she escalated her claims, stating that she had been pregnant with twins fathered by Michael and that their fate also ended tragically. Dana asserted that she had an abortion upon realizing Michael had killed her daughter and wanted nothing to do with him or his children. This claim was swiftly debunked by prosecutors, who noted the absence of any medical documentation to support her allegations of pregnancy, miscarriage, or abortion. End of trial. Maya's mother, Dana Carr, 24, was convicted of leaving the child to die and sentenced to 9 years in prison. Subsequently, Michael Damon's trial began. Unlike Dana, he chose not to testify in his defense. His lawyer argued that Michael lacked sadistic intent, premeditation, or planning regarding Maya's death, claiming it was an accident. Despite these weak justifications, Michael was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. However, the court allowed for the possibility of parole after 20 years. Maya's funeral was held on November 4, 2022. Following this heartbreaking event, James posted a final message for his daughter on social media. In it, he said goodbye, expressed his sorrow for not being able to protect her, and promised that they would be reunited one day.